Hey, Miguel Dorati back here on the MMA Museum podcast, and we are walking down the path of history as always. Another one of our feature interviews. This time we've got Joe Porkchop. They call him Porkchop, Joe Jordan, a real veteran of the old fight scene. A guy who I consider an unsung hero. You probably can't even count how many shows this guy saved by taking a fight on short notice, putting on a good fight afterwards, and really didn't get a lot of credit. Wound up with well over 50 fights. Sherdog, I think, has a total of amateur and pro fights for him over 66. I think 66 is a total, and I bet he has more than that. Definitely a guy who's got some stories and things, and didn't get a lot of love from the sport, in my opinion. I think he made one UFC appearance. I'm not sure. Did you fight in Bellator?
No. UFC 61 was my second pay-per-view fight. Before that, I fought in King of the Cage, and
Okay.
that was a pay-per-view. Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the beginning because Joe, you're originally from Iowa, right? So Iowa usually people think wrestling. So talk about your background coming up as a kid and what led you into the sport of MMA.
Well, my son was born and raised in Iowa, but I'm actually from Pike County, Kentucky,
Oh,
and
okay.
of all places. And if people are not familiar with Pike County, that's where some of the Hatfield and McCoy feud took place. The McCoys lived on the Kentucky side, and then the Hatfields lived across the Tug Fork in the Virginia side. And all my family were coal miners. So I tell people, of course, I'm short and stout built. You can't be a very tall, big man, working in the coal mines. But
Sure.
I grew up, my earliest memories was, you know, I first grew up, my earliest memories is with my grandfather and grandmother. We lived in a trailer park right off the main highway, and it was just all day long, semi trucks or coal trucks running back and forth along the roads. If people know what a Jake brake is, or that sound when those semi trucks are coming to a stop, those are some of the earliest things that I remember.
Wow. Yeah. Now I'm going to make some assumptions here, but coal mining, that's hard work, and
Yeah.
that's probably where you get your work ethic from. Is that
Well,
correct with the people around you?
well, well, that I like to say that's where my son gets his work ethic from.
Okay.
My toughness and stubbornness definitely comes from those people. It's easily the hardest working, hardest fighting, uh, drinking group of people I've ever been around. It was there's not a picture with my family where someone's not holding a can of beer, or they're not dirty, from working all day. It's everybody in my family up until my mother and my uncles started moving off. Now my uncles moved down to Florida, and they became successful businessmen. They own a surveying company down there in Naples, Florida. But my mother, she didn't move too far. My father, who I never met, he's from Harlan, Kentucky, and there's a great song by Patty Loveless. You'll never leave Harlem alive, and it's such an amazing song. It tells about the struggles of people in that part of the state and coal mining and trying to get away from the coal mines. But in that part of the country, there's no real industry, unless you're working as a school teacher or you're working in a hospital. Coal mining is well, it used to be, it's all there was, and now there's, that's slowly dying also.
Yeah, yeah.
But if anybody watched the History Channel's Hatfield McCoys that Kevin Costner starred in, it was a great TV series. That craziness and that type of fighting was my childhood.
Okay.
Incredible violence. Uh, extreme alcoholism, um, knives, guns, you name it. I saw it. I went through it. So later on when I became a professional fighter, it was people would comment, "Man, you're tough. You're this. You're that." When you're a little kid going through that stuff,
Yeah.
but so my case is nothing unusual. These kids, before mixed martial arts became so well known, these kids growing up, in Philly or in Cincinnati or any of these other cities, you know, you become a fighter not because you grew up in the best household. Very few of those.
Yeah. Well,
It's usually people with a tough background.
I appreciate, we could almost extend that to, I don't know if you follow UFC now, but you get like these guys from like Dagestan, like Chimaev, where
Sure.
they grew up in war, and
Yeah.
stuff like that. So, um, for you, the sport, you took it must have been more fun, less than real life. You know what I mean? The real life was more serious kind of thing. Did that help you adjust to the sport and the competitiveness of it? Because you were a game competitor.
Yeah, for whatever reason, competition. I may not be very good at any particular sport, but I was always a natural competitor. So, I didn't start wrestling. And I'll back up. My little when I was living in Pike County, Kentucky, my little brother was hit and killed by a car that swerved off the road. Some lady had just uh, left visiting her mother. I think she stayed all night with her. She was sick, had a stroke, something like that. And she swerved off the road and hit my little brother, who was his name's Sammy, and he was 2 years younger than me. Up until that point, I had bounced back and forth between with my grandmother and my mother, and for many years I called my grandmother my mom, and it wasn't later on until I started visiting with my mother and her stepfather, or my stepfather, who owned a trucking company and a small trucking company. Three coal trucks and one semi truck, and I used to work on those trucks as a little kid with them. But when my brother was hit and killed, it made everything worse in our household. The drinking, the violence got worse, and one night, my stepfather came really close to killing me. The last sequence was me running him into a refrigerator and it falling over into the floor, and him chasing after me with a knife, a kitchen knife, and I just barely got into the mud room, closed the door, held my foot at the bottom of the door as he was breaking the door down. And before he does, I get out, I run out into the carport and I run. I think the distance is less than 2 miles to my grandmother's house. And once the cops showed up, uh, that's when my mother decided to file for divorce. It's funny, living in that part of the country, no matter how bad things are, you never interfered with someone's household. You could be outside beating the shit out of your wife or your husband, and nobody interfered. It was just something that was unheard of. No one ever called the cops. It was, whatever happens at that house is between them. And I don't know what kind of unwritten rule it was, but it just no one. I'd miss school, many, many days of school, because my eye would be swollen shut, or I'd have my ear, something wrong with my face from getting beat up at the house, and nobody ever came to check on us. The school system, you know. Now I was born in '78. Things are different now in that part of the country, but back then, Lord, you know, None of that stuff would fly today. So, and the reason why I'm telling the story is that it took the death of my brother, then it took me finally calling the police because I thought he had probably killed my mother after coming after me. Cops get there, and once it gets out in the open, once the cops actually showed up, and they couldn't deny it anymore. She divorced him, and I moved in with my uncle in Cincinnati, Ohio, and that led to me joining the wrestling team in the eighth grade. We went from Cincinnati to Middletown, Ohio. When I went to, I think it was Verde Middle School, if I remember right. And so my first year of wrestling, well, let me back up. My the first kid that talked to me in eighth grade was a kid named Nick Kinsley, and he turns around in his desk and he said, "Dude, you got to come out and wrestle, dude." And I'll never forget it. He was this kid that wore what is it? He rode dirt bikes, raced dirt bikes, was always wearing the clothing, kind of had shaggier hair. And he's now a wrestling coach and a school teacher at Lebanon High School in Ohio. A good guy, great family. But that simple conversation of, dude, you got to come up. Yeah, so he's a wrestling coach and a school teacher. Great guy, great family. But just it could have been somebody from the lacrosse team, but it just happened to be wrestling. It was the first guy that tried to become, that befriended me, and ever since that conversation, my life has been different. Eventually, because I was living in a pretty bad house, even with my uncle. Now it was better than living with my mother in Pike County, Kentucky. It was still pretty bad, and my wrestling coach became my legal guardian, moved me into his home, into his basement, and really, everything that I knew about being a decent person really came from watching him and his wife and kids interact with each other. Or what I saw off of movies. My mother and father did a great job of showing me how not to act, and then I had a positive role model in my wrestling coach.
How old
So
were you when he became your guardian?
I was uh, I think it was the summer that I turned 16.
Okay, wow, wow. So
Yeah, so
still
I
a young
had
man. That's a
yeah,
whole lot of real life experience to pack into, your youth kind of thing. And it doesn't sound like there was a lot of fun or playing until, you know, till the wrestling mats came along. So,
yeah.
yeah, that definitely will make you hard now. So you wrestled. Did you go to college or did you
No,
continue your wrestling career, or how did that work out?
no. So I became before I left Ohio. I became the school's most successful high school wrestler. I was their first state placer, and I wasn't great, but I was great for that school. That school had no success. I think it's the reason why they brung my coach Tim Bashir in, was to try to turn the program around. I don't think they ever were very good. They had never had a state placer, no state champion, no nothing. And my junior year, I had set, I became the leader in wins, some other categories. I don't remember them all, but I became the first state placer. And that year, after I placed, I became ineligible to compete my senior year in Ohio. And my coach petitioned. We lost the petition, and I was too old by 2 or 3 days. I was born on the 28th of July. I could not turn 19 before August 1st. If I had been born August the 2nd or August the 1st, I would have stayed and wrestled my senior year. Now, my coach wanted me to stay, live with him. I had, a few letters from small schools that were interested in, for me to come out and wrestle for them. But I felt like such a loser that I was going to live with my wrestling coach and I couldn't wrestle. It was the whole reason why I thought I was there. But now I realize now, Tim cared for me. He didn't have me living in his home just so I could be successful at wrestling. And maybe that was initially the reason. But we grew to be a family. But I decided, since I can't wrestle, that I was going to take off and leave. And I didn't finish school until I was back in Kentucky, but this time I lived near Moorhead University, and that's where my mother had relocated. She had married her it was either her third or fourth husband by that time, and she had just given birth to my youngest brother, and so I went back there and I finished up school.
Okay. Now,
Yeah, I did
so
wrestle in college.
okay, so now you're high school graduate back in Kentucky, and now you're about 18 years old. What years is you said you were born in
90,
78, so you're in the 90s, mid 90s?
yeah, this is 97.
Okay. So now you're in
Yeah.
1997. I see your first MMA fight is in 2000, or at least the first official fight. So how does that transition take you in those 3 years? How what happened in those 3 years that took you into MMA?
Yeah. So why I was in a small town called Owensville, Kentucky, um, I met I met my future wife, and she and I started dating. And my high school coach called me up and said, "Hey, look, if you will come back to Ohio, I'll give you a job as my head assistant coach." He had just moved to a high school in Hamilton, Ohio, started coaching. So I talked to my girlfriend at the time, Shauna Reynolds, and as I looked, she had never been to that part of. She'd never lived in a big city before, and so it was pretty easy to talk her into it. It was an adventure, something that and she and I packed up and we moved to, I believe we settled into Middletown, Ohio, is where we ended up getting a room. Just a terrible upstairs bedroom. We had a shared bathroom with the people across the hallway. And if your listeners, if they will Google Middletown woman's body found uh, cut into pieces in the basement by boy. We lived two houses down from this guy
Oh
who
God.
took a circular saw, skill saw, and cut her up, and then the mother helped him spread her body parts out all through Middletown area, and then I believe it was the Miami River. They found her torso,
God.
and this led to them both being charged and convicted. And we lived two houses down. This area, it was on. If people Google this, it was near Garfield Street in Middletown, Ohio. It was just a terrible, but we were so poor. We you do what you have to do, right?
Yeah.
And so we worked a bunch of odd jobs. We had one car, so we would work through temporaries to, just so we could both work at the same place. And it was you couldn't get any poorer than what we were at that time.
Okay. No, so now I'm gonna guess here, but you're a tough guy. You've got your tough upbringing. I don't think you're afraid of violence at this point. So MMA kind of comes into your life as a way to make a couple $100 in a weekend. Is that more or less the right
Yeah, yeah,
summing it up?
yeah, sure. So after we moved up to Ohio, and I lost track there. Um,
That's okay.
after I got paid in full for my 1 year of coaching and a little bit of money we had saved, my wife had always wanted to go down to New Orleans, and she was a big reader. She's a smart lady, and thank the Lord that my son has her. Um, but what was it? It's the Vampire Chronicles, or I forget what books Anne Rice is famous for, but
Okay.
it's a vampire books. And she lived down in New Orleans. My wife always wanted to go, so we pack up the car and we take off to New Orleans, and we spend a night at a campsite. We wake up the next day. We rent a room out of a lady's house, and down in that town, I think I only met him once or twice, was Rich Clementi. You know Rich.
Oh, sure, sure. You fought him
Yeah,
eventually, so we'll
yeah,
get
I
to that.
did. I did. But the first time we ran into each other, I was training with oh Lord, I forget his name now. I was training at this Kempo karate place that had a judo instructor. I think the instructor's name was Seth.
Okay.
And this judo instructor, he owned a bar there in Slidell. And I think Rich, Rich might remember his name since Rich still lives down there. But years after I moved off, that guy ends up getting arrested for kidnap and beating one of his girls, and he was cheating on his wife, who had half ownership of that bar that he ran in a restaurant. Ends up going to prison for a while, and just a real scumbag. But anyways, so we go down. I start cross training for the first time down in New Orleans. And then while I'm there, the judo instructor throws me and he breaks my scapula, your shoulder blade,
Hmm.
breaks it in two spots. And so I'm busted up, no insurance. I go to the hospital. There's not much you can do for it. And not only did it break my scapula, but it fractured my uh, part of my rotator cuff. So they were worried about my shoulder was going to get fused. So I had to do all these exercises to make sure that I kept range of motion in my arm. And so we pack up, and we had a few dollars, enough in gas to get back to Kentucky, where my girlfriend's mother lived, and we stayed with her for a while until I recovered. And when after I recovered, I ended up training in Lexington, Kentucky, with a gym called Four Seasons United Martial Arts, and the owner is Mike O'Donnell. He's now a black belt underneath Carlson Gracie Jr. And so for I don't know, it was a few years that I trained under Mike, and I also joined a amateur boxing team uh, ran by Coach Sarge William Ferris. It was a Legends Boxing Gym. Um, the kicking and stuff came much later, but I grew up a huge boxing fan, like most people my age. Watching Mike Tyson. He was probably the biggest star
Sure.
around the sporting star when I was growing up. Between him and Michael Jordan, right? I mean, those are icons.
Sure.
But so
Well,
the boxing.
in a
Go
way,
ahead.
you got lucky too, because heading down south, you run into Rich Clementi. It, that's good pedigree for MMA. That's not a bad person, even in the early days, to get in touch with. And when Rich is a smart guy, he's a mover and a shaker. So you probably learned a lot in a short period of time there. At least had a good guy. You could run into
Yeah.
worse people.
Well, yeah. Let me make this clear. Rich and I didn't train together. I ran into him, and there might have been a couple words shared between us at the time. There was a guy named Shannon Berry that was down there doing some grappling. I don't think Shannon ever fought, but he took me over to the gym where Rich was training, and we went in on some off night, and I think it was just Rich and another guy in there. And I said, "Hey, what's up?" And that was about it. I was still just barely scratching the surface of mixed martial arts. the I was more interested in Bourbon Street and and all the different foods they had down there, at the time.
Sure.
It wasn't really until I got back to Lexington, Kentucky, and training with Mike O'Donnell and the whole Four Seasons group that that it, you know
That
that
you
really said in that was going to be a fighter.
got you. Officially here, April 2002. List your first pro fight, but now we go back to something called Tough Enough in December of 2000. If I remember this Tough Enough, was that in Vegas?
Well, I'm not sure what you're seeing, but what I think it is we did these pancration style fights in Ohio, in Circleville, Ohio, Andersonville, I believe. I know Circleville was one of them, but small towns, and it was open hands to the face and closed fists to the body, and I developed a really good left hand open hand slap. I had a really good left hook slap, and those days spent in pancration or doing those pancration types of events really helped me out a lot once I became a uh, a bouncer and doorman at the various clubs that I worked at. And I've you won't believe at how many guys I've dropped with open hand slaps at the bar, at guys that want to square up with you at the club. I didn't have to risk closing my hands and breaking my hands on these guys, and it all goes back to trying to be effective, fighting under pancration rules.
Okay. Now, was that in Illinois? The pancration stuff?
No, it was, well, you know what? There was, I think it was actually in Indiana. There
Okay.
was, I fought in two or three tournaments in Ohio that was open hand. And then we went to, I'm almost certain it was Indiana instead of Illinois, the last one I competed in. And it was tough. It was a tough man competition. It
Yeah.
wasn't like tough man like boxing, but it was tough man pancration style.
Hmm.
And I it's been so long. It's been
Sure,
so
sure. No,
long.
in so many fights, so I don't blame you. But for the record, some of the stuff that appears on your Sherdog record, it wasn't Indiana, it wasn't Illinois. Now, even in one of these amateur type fights, you fought a tournament. You actually fought a couple of times in one day, that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
you were already kind of getting knee deep into some of the stuff. I was looking at one of the cards. Bulldog Darrell Smith was on the card. Brandon Bledsoe was on the card.
yeah,
Um, uh, there are a few people there that went on to do things in the sport. Ron Rump fought for me a few times.
yeah.
So you were already getting in the mix. So did you love it right away? Did you think right away you're going to keep doing this? Because it became a habit. It looks like.
No, no, for sure. And so many of those fights are not showing up on Sherdog. I loved it. I mean, it was the only thing I was ever good at, other than getting in trouble, was wrestling, and this was the closest thing that I could get to it, where I felt like I was a winner. And I've never sat down with a doctor. I've never sat down with anybody and talked about my upbringing. That's just not where I'm from. People just didn't do that stuff. But without a doubt, I it affects anybody that grows up in that kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
all these years, of course I've been searching for a way to feel like that I'm successful in something. And sports, even though I wasn't very all that great, I was still better at that than anything else in my life. And it probably has a lot to do with that. I would I could easily say, "Oh, I was just a badass, and I wanted to whoop everybody." But I mean, in reality, it's a good friend of mine read a quote, read something that he had found, and it goes, "You are what has been done to you." And that hit me really hard. You are what has been done to you, and there's a lot of truth in that. Everybody's heard, "You are what you are." No, no, you are what has been done to you. And most of us can't control what is done to us when we're kids.
Sure.
And a lot of these emotions, a lot of these feelings and thoughts that I don't think of, it all came back when you told me we're going to go way back. We're going to go back to the beginning. And I'm
Sure.
like, oh man, this is going to be tough. This is going to be tough because, I'm 45 years old, and I've fought some of the best guys in the world, and I've stood right in front of them, and I've shown everybody that I'm tough enough to be in there with those guys. But those scars that you carry as a little kid, they're tough.
Sure.
You
No,
know, and
I want to thank you because you've actually given a great deal already in this interview in terms of personal stuff, and things that go beyond the fight game too, including you are what's been done to you is a quote that should be remembered. That's a pretty deep thing to go through.
hey, it is, and I've been sitting around for a couple of days, going, man, like I've been stressed out. So I kind of quickly got past that part of it. But man, it's everything that has happened, uh, all the mistakes, you know, everything has put me where I am right now, and that's a
Yeah,
good spot. My kid's successful, and I know we're getting ahead of us, but it's
yeah, no, and,
yeah,
and you definitely are a great guide for him. I see that you're not telling me results, and you're sharing pictures. You're there with him every step of the way. So,
oh
but
sure,
we'll get to that part of it here. So take
sure.
take me to now. It looks like the first pro fight 2002, Muncie, Indiana. Charles Lewis, a hook and shoot veteran who I know. What went down there, and who ran that show? What do you remember?
Well, look, I mean, I you know, Chas Bowling is always going to be part of my story. He's
Oh,
I
Indiana
love his.
legends.
Oh, for sure. And I don't know how I got I got scheduled for competing in his tournaments. I remember going up to quite a few, and they were very basic cage. Uh, we fought. Yeah, I tell the story. Bowling comes in and he does the pre-fight rules meeting, and and he's going over, no body, no eye gouging. Um, you can headbutt, you can throw downward spiking elbows to the back of the head. You could, and he goes over the rules and he stops and he turns to go to leave, and then he turns around and goes, oh, by the way, if you have a cup, put it on because you can strike to the groin here also. And and I looked over at the guys I was with, and I went, "Holy shit!" like I figured that was the one thing, along with not eye gouging, that you couldn't do. I mean, we all saw the fight in the UFC where what's his face gets punched by Keith Hackney over and over in the groin. Uh, but
Joe Son,
I'm
yeah.
yeah, Joe Son. Yeah, here I am in Indiana in a smoke-filled bingo hall in a very, very basic cage, uh, and I'm like, this is real. I mean, this is holy smokes. And I think I fought. I think I fought 3 times that night. I can remember 2 fights, but I think it was a 8-man tournament, and I could be wrong. Um, but Charles, if I remember correctly, I have the fight on VHS tape, by the way. You know,
Oh,
who
wow,
who
great.
who in the world has VHS tape, right? And I still have it. There was a quick takedown against the cage, um, and I headbutt him in the face. So I'm holding on to the cage, and my very best, Mark Coleman type of headbutt to the face. And he turns over on all fours, and I stand up and I soccer kick him right in the face, you know. And he jumps up. I didn't knock him out, and I can't kick worth a shit. And he jumps up. I grab him from behind. I throw him down to the mat, and if I'm not getting him mistaken with someone else, when I take him down, it broke his collarbone,
Uh-huh.
and they end up stopping the fight because of the broken collarbone. And does it stay on the record? I haven't looked at them in years. Is it TKO?
It's got three fights. It's got Charles Lewis submission to strikes, then Sean Sherman KO slam, and that might be the
Oh,
broken collarbone.
that is that's and look, I'll be honest. It's been a long time.
That's
A
okay.
lot of hits to the head. I knew one of them. I had broke the collarbone that night. The third fight, I don't remember the third fight. I couldn't take. I know I won. I
Okay.
won that night. I got presented a nice big belt that I've had forever. Uh, and I remember standing up there and the smoke. I don't smoke. My wife doesn't smoke, and we don't drink. But just the burning in my eyes, it was terrible. It was bad.
Sure, sure. No, I've been to some of those bars in Indiana and been to some of those fights. It's funny. You're not at all straying much from the truth there.
Yeah,
Now, as we continue here, your next fight, which is in May, so you maybe a little less than a month later, um, yeah, you're into freestyle fighting championship, which I believe this is down in Louisiana, and you fought Rich
yeah,
Clemente really early in your career. So it was a guy
yeah.
that you had met earlier, and now you're fighting him. What did that feel like or look like for you?
Well, so uh, you know, listen. I'm old and fat now. You know, no one looks at me and thinks, man, that guy used to be in a really good shape, 130 pounds, or he fought at 143 pounds, 65 kilograms for Shudo over in Hawaii. Like no one would ever guess, right? And if you put Rich and I beside each other, Rich is that one size bigger than me. Like he's just a little bit taller, his wrists a little bit wider, his shoulders, he's just, if Rich and I were on the same team together, like I would have been the good 145 pounder, Rich would have been the 155 pounder, and we would have been a hell of a, team, right?
Hmm.
We'd have been tough, 1-2 punch, right? If I had stayed down in Slidell, it would just been a natural fit. And when I fought Rich, a buddy of mine, this is a true story, a buddy of mine named Stoney Dennis, and he's a successful businessman in Lexington.
And a hook and
He,
chew veteran.
yeah, he drove me down, and we're sitting around, and they had some type of an event going on. Maybe it was submission grappling the day before the fight. And we're looking at all the tough guys walking around and girls or whatever. And I'm not joking. He points, says, "Man, what if you had to fight that guy?" And he pointed to Rich, because Rich was like mean mugging people, right? Like he just had that look, and Rich is a real confident guy, anyways, right? I don't
Sure.
think anyone's ever accused him of not being confident. And it ended up being, and I didn't recognize Rich, even though we had spoke briefly when I was down in Slidell. Some time had passed, and So the night that we fight, I'm in the cage, and Rich is walking out and he's taking his time. There's a lot of fans. I think it was in Gulfport, Alabama, or Biloxi, Alabama. Is that right? Or Mississippi?
Yeah,
What?
Mississippi.
Mississippi, yeah, yeah, because Mobile, Alabama, and he's walking out. I'm looking at him walking out, and he winks and blows a kiss at me, and I'm like, man, that's knowing Rich now, that's like perfect, right? I
Yeah.
mean, of course he would wink and blow a kiss at you. When we get in there and when the bell rings, I didn't get hit one time. I didn't get kicked. I didn't get kneed. I left unscathed. What happened is that I shot immediately. I got him in a body lock. I pushed him into the corner, and we stayed there. And I think they might have ended up breaking us because of inaction. And I did the same thing again. And once I had my hands locked around him, I was able to stay in that position, but I wasn't able to take him down initially. And I don't know if I really took him down or if he kind of pulled guard because I wasn't going to let go. And if they had broke us, I'd have done the same thing all over again, and I would have
Sure.
kept doing it. And listen, at that time I just wasn't confident enough to stay out there and strike with a bigger guy. And we go to the ground, and I've got my hands on his biceps. I think I'm in pretty good position, and I go to push off his chest to set up and throw some strikes. And when I did, he swung his hips out, caught me at an arm bar, and that's all she wrote.
Yep. Yep.
You know, uh, it wasn't a scratch on me. He didn't have to. He just he used the skills that was there, and that's it. I mean, it's just it's a weird feeling to leave a fight, a real fight, not a submission grappling match, and not be busted up.
Yeah.
I got caught in an armbar, and it's a long ways to drive and not have a busted lip. I kind of felt kind of cheated. It's like a fight didn't happen. I got caught in a submission, and that's all she is.
Well, at least it was a good guy, as you mentioned. Now, as we go through the record here, obviously the wins start piling up. You're fighting, and now eventually here by October, you're winding up in the something called Tennessee Shudo, and
Yes,
you actually so talk a little bit about that. Was that associated with Shudo in Japan? And
you
here you
know,
fought another guy that turns out to be a guy who had a decent run in the UFC, a guy named Raleigh Delgado. Now he
yeah,
was real tall. He was like fighting a pencil, probably to you.
yes, yeah.
Describe that experience.
Well, so at the Four Seasons United Martial Arts Gym in Lexington, that's the Mike O'Donnell's gym, black belt underneath Carlson Gracie Jr. John Rankin came up, and John Rankin. I mean,
Sure, sure,
old
Rankin.
school guy, yeah. And he came up and did some work with the guys, and somehow I don't know if John contacted me or the gym, or if he gave our contacts to the guys running the Shudo stuff. Somehow I ended up on the card, and Rankin was there, and I also believe. Do you remember the heavy, really short heavyweight that did all the forward rolls that would catch people on knee bars?
Yeah, Jonathan Ivy.
Yeah, Jonathan Ivy, of course.
Sure.
I can't remember if he was on the card, if he was just there. I can't, he might have been on one of those cards. But yeah, I went down and I fought the crazy Cuban, and it was an easy fight. I mean, no insult against him. It was an easy, boring fight. I just took him down over and over and held position. There was never a threat of me getting submitted, and I don't remember busting him up any, but it was just I mean, it's not a fight that I would ever show and brag about. It was just an easy win, and he's a legit fighter. I mean, he's a I'm sure he's a good guy. We didn't get to know each other very well, but I mean, that's just what it was.
No, he's a good guy. He's from out in Arkansas, if that area, and he's still training. He still has a gym, and I think he's got some of his students in the UFC right now. I think that Bryce Mitchell, if you follow it, is one of his
Yeah,
guys. Um, and just as an interesting side note, when John Rankin fought in Pride, I was actually his corner man. So
no kidding.
yeah, so
Well,
I definitely know John and has a spot in my heart as one of the good guys here.
you
Now,
know, I haven't talked to John in years. I don't know. I'm assuming he's doing well. Is he still in Clarksville?
I believe he's still there. I think he still has or has recently started doing like a travel business where
Okay.
he's doing very well. He's actually on Facebook. You can definitely find him and yeah, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you too. I
Yeah.
interviewed him already and
Oh,
definitely
great.
a definitely. Now after all, this is where we get into where you said you fought everybody and you've been in front of some really tough people. Here's another guy that had an extended run in the UFC and was a little bit of a controversial guy and a guy that I know, for example, that Rich Clemente himself didn't like at all. This is Melvin Guillard.
Yeah, yeah, Melvin. Yeah, so I believe his coach at the time was Joe Anacona,
Yep.
uh, who owned a bar down in New Orleans, and or it was close to New Orleans if it wasn't in New Orleans, and it's you know we, we drive down, and I've got a couple teammates with me, and we I think we stayed the night in Joe's bar. He had above it. He had a gym. He had a little office and like a little an apartment of some sort. Instead of paying for a hotel for us, he put us up there. And the next day, because I fought for Joe more than once, so I don't think I have this confused. But the next day they had an outside show, and I was going to fight Melvin. Melvin was one of his students, and the weather turned bad, so they had to move the show inside. And inside there was already a ring inside. I guess it just stays there, right? And so we go in, and he and I fight, and still, this was back when I still wasn't very confident standing up, and I easily out wrestled Melvin, took him down a bunch. Uh, but on the way down, there had been a lot of focus on training on finishing guys with submission. So, and it was a terrible game plan. But I was like, I've been working a lot on leg locks, foot lock, and I set back several times against Melvin for a leg lock. Didn't work. He scrambles up to his feet, and I'd have to take him back down. Now, during this time, he landed some good strikes. He outstruck me for sure, but I was probably on top. And I don't know. I mean, I forget how long the rounds were, but I was probably on top 80% of the time, if I remember this right. Of course, this is me retelling it, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I got screwed out of a decision. I think it was in the UFC on television. I think they award me as the winner. He landed a couple shots. I take him down. I stay on top almost the whole time, and that's what
Yep. Yep.
happened. I mean, none of us was busted up. If I had anybody that had any sense that was cornering me, they might listen. Quit setting back for leg locks. Just stay on top. Just ride it out. Because Mel was pretty explosive on his feet, and,
Yeah,
and he
for
was
sure.
young, and he was young back then, and we were. I think I'm older than Melvin. I think I've told you before. I'm 45. He's probably a few years younger than me at least,
Yeah.
and
And
but
he
yeah,
was
I
in
mean,
his hometown, with his coach, and
I
you could
wasn't going
see
to
the
win that
decision go.
decision.
Yeah, yeah,
you know. And so I think I got screwed over on that one. And then it was sometime later that Joe brought me back down for another fight that I won, and there was have before I tell the story, do you do you know anything about what happened the night that me and my teammates stayed at Joe's place?
No, why don't you shed some
Nothing.
light on it?
Oh gosh. So so Joe, this I don't know Joe personally, right? I'm sure he's all right guy. The night that we're staying in his apartment, it could have been, I think it was the first time that I went down and fought Melvin. Uh, there was a string of people coming in and out of his upstairs apartment slash gym. And if you ever been in this gym, it's a really nice place. Like and I would love to have parking lot, bar, gym above, my bachelor's pad beside of it. It's pretty cool setup, right? But he had people in and out all night. And Joe, by the end of the show, when I fought Melvin, he had more than a few beers, okay, and he could barely talk to me and give me the money he owed me, which I don't hold that against anybody. I mean, he did right by me and paid me what he should have. Um, but that night, somebody somebody that came in there robbed Joe, robbed him of a bunch of money. And I don't know where this money was. I don't know if it was in a safe. I don't know where he kept his money. I don't know if he spent that money and doesn't remember, or because I mean, look, he had a hard time just counting out the money that he gave me. So it's untellable what really happened, right? And the next morning we leave, Joe is blowing up our phones, right? And he's like, you've got this much time to get back here. You've got this much time to do this and do that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And man, Joe's a old school tough guy, right? And he's quite a bit older than I am. But legitimately, like he was a kickboxer for a long time, isn't that right, Joe Anacona?
Yeah, I think so. And he
Yeah,
trained people, and he put on fights a long time down there. So
yeah. Listen, I've been around tough guys and fake tough guys, and I believe Joe was
was
a,
legit.
a legit tough guy. Yeah, yeah. I really do, right? And anybody around his age, I think he holds his own, right? And he was coming off that way, making some pretty serious threats, and then we're talking to Joe, and then he starts asking questions. What about this? What about this guy and this and then we started giving him some descriptions of the people who was coming in and out that night. I guess Joe didn't lock up the place the way he should have, or he allowed too many people come in and party that night, right? And and we end up giving him a description of a particular person, and and Joe goes, oh, he was there, and I went, well, I don't know who that is, but like, yeah, and I think I don't know what Joe did about it. If he did something about it, I wouldn't be surprised. He comes off as that kind of guy that would do something about it, and so he had us down for another fight. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how many months it was. We
Okay.
came down and fought, and everything was cool. He offered for us to stay in the same place again. We chose not to. We're like, no, we'll pay for our own hotel room, and because you listen, I mean, once was enough, and
Sure.
Joe back then, he had a group of guys that was with him, and it looks like something from a movie. They all look pretty tough too,
Yeah.
and I just I wouldn't want to be there by myself or just, with one of my friends
Yeah,
and
you don't
have some
need it.
bad blood.
Yeah, you don't need a second misunderstanding. The first
No,
one
no,
worked itself out. So no, you're a wise man
absolutely.
that way. Now,
Yeah.
somewhere along the line, now getting through here, you're already what anybody would term a veteran. You know you've got about 15 fights under your belt officially. You probably got more than that unofficially, and it looks like this may be your first experience with Monty Cox. Now, um, because you go down to Hawaii and fight in Super Brawl, and Monty was usually involved with TJ and his shows. So,
Yeah.
how did that all materialize? Because Super Brawl, you got a co-main event spot against Eddie Yeagan on a card where I believe the Shudo World Title was on the line between Inoue and Masanori Suda. So, this is
Yeah.
a step up from the bar with Joe Ancona.
No, for sure, for sure. And and it's funny because that whole fight card, or at least my involvement, started not with Monty. It started with those same Shudo guys that ran the event. Maybe John was involved in that first event with the Shudo guys down in Tennessee, in Clarksville, Tennessee, and they first reached out to me and wanted to know if I would fight Kid Yamamoto. And they listened. He was a bad dude back in those days, you know.
Yeah.
And and there's a lot of I don't know how much the stories are true about being part of organized crime and this and that. I've heard a lot of stuff about Yamamoto over the years. Is he still alive? You
No,
know?
he passed away from cancer, actually, stomach cancer.
Oh, did he? Okay.
He died in the arms of a training partner. To tell
No,
you the
really.
story, yeah, I
Yeah.
got to interview Ensign, and
No.
yeah, they told a lot of stories. He was from a family of wrestlers. Like his sisters were like Olympic wrestlers, and he had I don't know, his father might be Yakuza as well, but his father definitely applied a lot of pressure on him, and he died not with his family, but with training partners on the island of Guam. So,
No.
hats off to Yamamoto. He was a number one type of guy back in his day. So that would have been some type of challenge for you, huh?
Oh well, for sure. Yeah. I've been a massive underdog, but so what? Um, so they offered me the Kid Yamamoto fight. I'm like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And some time goes by, and Monty Cox calls me, say, hey, if I remember this right, he says, forget those guys, those Shudo guys. I'm the one putting the card together. I think this is how it went. And he said, you're not fighting Kid Yamamoto. Jeff Kern's going to fight Kid Yamamoto. And I went, okay. And he says, but I have a fight for you in Hawaii on the same card against a guy named Eddie Ogden. He's a local guy, he's got a big following over there. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure. The pay was the same. The travel arrangements was all the same. I didn't have to fight Yamamoto. And I went, okay, well, whatever, And it's not who Monty is, right? I mean,
Sure.
it's yeah, I don't know if I knew who Monty was. Yeah, Monty probably told me
Who
who
he
he was. You know
was.
what? I take that back. I take that back. Monty had called me before I fought for Monty. Monty had called and asked if I would help supply some fighters for an event in Cincinnati that he might have been doing with Kerry Shaw, Meat Truck,
Yeah, Rich
or
Franklin.
Rich Franklin,
Yep.
Ice Events. And I think that was the first time I got to know who Monty was. And of course, he told me all about, his credentials and all that stuff. And, when
Okay,
you hear
so
me?
yes, sir. We're back, and the sound is much better. So you're talking about the Monty Cox experience, your first meetings with him, and setting up the Shudo fight with Eddie Yeagan.
Yeah, yeah. So, Monty took over the negotiations, and there really was none. He said, "This is what you get paid." And I was like, "All right, I'm going to Hawaii," and I weighed in at 143.3 pounds, but I really didn't. Okay. The night before weigh-ins, I've never told anyone this.
Mhm.
The night before weigh-ins, um, I go to the gym that they provided for us to make weight, and I go and I asked the lady at the front desk, I said, "Hey, you got a scale that I can use to check my weight?" She went, "Oh, yeah, yeah. The promoter left the scale you're going to use tomorrow, and that's it right there." And she pointed over and over in the corner where the scale was. And I went, "Well, can I use it?" She went, "Yeah." So I go over and I get on the scale and I lean this way and I lean this way and I lean back and I finally found a little sweet spot on it where, man, I could take off a few pounds, not 0.3, but an actual a few pounds. I was like, holy smokes! So I got my weight down to where if I leaned on that scale just right, I could weigh 143 pounds. And who does it, right? Who doesn't get on the scale and lean and try to find some way to cheat it, right?
Oh,
So
sure. Well,
I'm
well, there's a reason why promoters are, put scales on lockdown nowadays because too many
yeah,
experiences, too many smart
yes, yes.
guys.
Yeah, TJ left it out in that gym, and it was TJ Thompson's show.
Yeah.
And so when I showed up for weigh-ins, and it was at some restaurant bar, during the day, I was praying that it wasn't going to be a different scale, and it wasn't. It was the scale that I had figured out, and I made weight, 143 pounds, 65 kilograms, and I think the fight before mine on that card was Big Frog, Jeff Curran, lost. And I don't think it was, Jeff wouldn't be happy with me saying this, but I don't think it was a very competitive fight between him and Kid Yamamoto. I don't think Jeff got TKO, but I think it was, clearly, him getting outstruck on the feet and then Yamamoto scoring takedowns or Jeff pulling guard and not being able to submit Kid. I think style wise, you know, if we would sit around and talk about hypotheticals, we would say, well, Yamamoto would be a bad matchup for Jeff,
Mhm.
uh, and Jeff's a good guy. I
No,
don't
he's
I
a
don't mean
great fighter,
that.
but probably Yamamoto. You start with he was probably a little better athlete,
Yeah,
a little faster, a little quicker, very much strong on his feet, and he was on top of the world with confidence. And Jeff was a thinking fighter, so he could
yeah,
worry at times.
yeah, yeah. And it was but I mean, Kid Yamamoto could have had a chance of beating anybody back then.
Sure,
He would have been a bad matchup for a lot of people, and I probably would have stood there and tried to punch and wrestle with him and got busted up, where Jeff probably lost a decision. I don't
he
remember.
did. He did 3 rounds.
Did he? Yeah, and I probably would have tried to throw licks and got caught, but whatever. Um, but Eddie and I fought, and again, I'm still, I'm the wrestler trying to learn, to be confident with my striking, and he was just so easy to out wrestle, so easy to throw and pick up for big highlight slams, and I tell you, you talk about learning a lesson, you know, after the fight, I was, I was really happy. I'm the co-main event. This is a big time card, and back then, Super Brawl or Icon, I think it became Icon later,
Yeah,
drew a lot of people. I mean, it was a big time event on the island,
sure.
and
Blaisdell Arena, it's a few thousand
like,
people.
yeah, Mike in Honolulu, and you could just tell TJ was not happy, and Eddie was, his local guy at the time, because I had not started working for Monty yet. I didn't understand how important it was for your local ticket sellers to win. At the end of the day, every promoter wants their local big time ticket sellers to win, regardless of who they fight. And here I am, nobody knows me, and I whoop, one of their boys, and I sold no tickets.
Yep.
That's bad business. And so, I was lucky that I was brung back. I don't remember how long it was afterwards, and I fought Colo Coca, and
Sure.
learned a lot of lessons from TJ. TJ and I had a good talking after I beat Colo in my second fight in Hawaii. But it's a story I always retell. But what's fights? What's next?
Well, the truth is, to stay on that theme, um, Monty and TJ were partners, but they're both type A personalities. Monty may have put one over on TJ and snuck you in there on him too, just to, prove a point, or a little pissing contest between promoters and friends too.
Yeah,
Just could happen that way. So you
sure.
at least had Monty on your side, and while we're on the Monty subject, I talked to him about you a little bit, and he said, ask him about the time that he drove my ring through the snow or through the winter.
Oh,
So
cool.
why don't we digress into this story here?
Well, look, I mean, so I'm up. Listen, I'm living in Iowa, and I had moved up, and this is after Jens and I had already fought, and I think I had flown back to Hawaii for a second fight with Colo, and I'm pulling his ring, his boxing ring, to a to one of our weekly shows. At one time, I was running 3 weekly shows every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. I was running fights, and I was making bucketfuls of money. I ain't gonna say how much money, and I paid all my taxes. Right, I didn't skip out on any. Unlike Monty, I paid all mine, and we. I was pulling this ring in a snowstorm to a gentleman's club called the Lumberyard up in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. And it was complete full nudity gentleman's club that we would set the ring up over the middle stage. They had 3 stages. In the middle one, we had a ring that had telescoping legs, so it would set over top. It would had to be raised up a little bit, and the ring card girls uh, walk around completely nothing on. It was just nuts. I mean, just the crazy stuff that happened at those shows is just it's unreal. But I end up wrecking and jackknifing on the way up. The trailer crushes in the side of his Dodge Durango, and I kept the truck moving. I knew if it stopped, I would never get it out. But we drove off. Interstates, the semi trucks are turned sideways. It was ice. You've seen on
Oh yeah.
video what ice does to those big trucks. And somehow I didn't die, and we got that thing back on the interstate. Got to the show. I had a couple workers that worked for me full time, and they packed that sucker through ice and snow around the back of the nightclub because I couldn't drive the truck back there, and set up the ring, and we had a show that night.
Wow.
And it's crazy. It's crazy in Iowa when it's bad weather. There's more people showing up to the strip clubs on those nights than the other night. They
That's
want to get out
funny.
of the house, and they want to challenge themselves of whether or not they could get there. And it was a uh, bring your own alcohol. You can carry your own alcohol
Sure,
there.
sure. Usually
Yeah,
all
so
nude places are like that, that you got to
yeah,
bring
yeah.
your own
They
booze.
carry all their cases of beer with them, and
Yeah,
it
it's
was
funny.
crazy.
I've never been in the winter in Iowa. I've been to Iowa, obviously, but not in the winter. But I got to experience the winter in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where it was about I was working at a bank. We walked into the building, we came out. in like 3 hours, and there was like a foot and a half of snow in like three
Yeah,
hours.
yeah.
So
You
it
know,
gets rough up there.
people who've never experienced -40 with the wind chill factor, I'm driving up with a friend of mine up to a show in Spirit Lake, Iowa, or Spirit Lake, Minnesota, and we get off the interstate and we're on some highway, and there's no cars around because it's snowing, it's a storm, but we had to get there for weigh-ins, and it was the first time that I realized that if the car breaks down, we could really die,
Yeah.
before I made it to someone's house. It was so cold that everything hurt immediately when you got out in the wind. And,
Yeah, no,
a
it's
lot of times,
dangerous. In
yeah,
Sioux Falls that day, I remember going to the bar, at the hotel afterwards, and a couple of guys, local guys, came in. And when a snowstorm like that comes in, they got to worry about bringing the cows in quickly, because if not, the cows get snowed in. You know what I mean? Because they're slower moving animals and stuff. So it's like,
sure.
I'm from New York originally. So it's like I couldn't even conceive of that kind of craziness. So yeah, definitely an experience with the weather. That's fascinating. So let's get back on track here. So you get Jens Pulver. Let's talk about Jens and the fight there, because this is an extreme challenger. This is Mai's official show. Jens is his guy. Um, you're kind of doing him a favor. This is in Rock Island, Illinois, which is Monty's area and stuff like that.
Backyard.
Yeah. What was this like? And where are you traveling from at this point? Are you in Iowa already, or are you
No, 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 no. I was living in Mount Sterling, Kentucky. It's the town, one town over from where my wife grew up.
okay?
Uh, Monty calls me, and by this time, we know each other. And he says, "Hey, got a fight for you. Would you like to fight Jens Pulver?" And before he could say anything else, I said yes. Uh, it didn't matter what the money was. He said, "Well, let me tell you how much." I said, "It doesn't matter." I actually told him that, which is, I mean, it's so stupid, right? You know,
especially especially to a shark like Monty too.
Oh yeah, for sure, yeah, for sure. He never told me this, but maybe the offer originally was more, right? But I mean, it was pennies anyway. You don't get any money out of money. So he and I was like, yeah, yeah, for sure. Let's do it. And there was no hesitation. Jens and Matt Hughes, they were my idols. My sporting idols. I wanted to be Jens and Matt Hughes. I thought if I could combine Matt Hughes picking up and slamming everyone and Jens's knockout power, that I would have been like the perfect MMA fighter. And
Sure.
they were everything that I wanted to be. And so, yeah, of course. And when I drove up, I had two of my teammates with me as my cornermen, and two guys that I kind of like I coached slash trained with. I was like the best guy in the gym, and they were, I wouldn't want to say I was their coach, but I was pretty close to it. Chris Griffin and Kaushik Sin went up with me, and I believe they both fought on the same card, and they worked my corner, and we had a great fight. It's a shame that full fight did not happen under the big lights on a pay-per-view. I mean, it would have been one of those fights that people would have talked about. It was such an entertaining fight. Kerry Shaw was setting cage side. I think he was one of the judges. Um, but Jens, the last fight that the majority of the general public had seen was Jens had just beat BJ Penn. And if I remember right, he left the UFC after beating BJ Penn over negotiations, and he was going to fight and shoot him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was going to fight in Shudo, and then he ended up fighting in some other events. I don't know if he ever made it, if he ever actually fought in Shudo, but that's what I was told, and that's kind of how supposedly I got the offer, because I had been fighting a couple Shudo events, and whatever. It's I
That's
don't regret it.
yeah, no, you're right. That's a fight that deserves a lot more attention than it actually got. A big name, a former champion, and it just goes to show too how small you know the sport still was back then. That you could get a guy who was on top of the world in the UFC, and you know the negotiations. It's not like he was going to make life changing money anywhere. So but it was
Yeah.
just over a few $1,000 or whatever, and it changed everything. So very interesting. So now with Jens, right before that, you'd also fought Ryan Ackerman, who Ackerman had some of that heat for a little while. I believe
Oh, yeah,
He ended Miguel Torres's long winning streak, and
yeah,
a few things like that. What do you remember about Ryan? Because he's a wrestler kind of cut from your cloth, like a
yeah.
tough
I
guy
think
first.
I think I lost. I lost to Ackerman, right?
It says you lost a decision. Yeah.
Yeah. So before I tell the story, I want to make sure that's the one I lost. Um, and that fight probably took place in
Okay.
Illinois.
I'll check it right now while
Yeah.
you're talking. Shudo Midwest. So I think that would be Illinois.
Yeah. Okay. So I had to make 43
Oh
again for
no,
that.
I'm sorry. It was the Hammond Civic Center in Indiana.
Hammond. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's up close to Chicago.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In the corner. Yeah. You know, uh, nothing. Taking nothing away from him, right? He won the fight. He cut weight. He did a better job of cutting weight than I did, and I struggled. I was dying making 143 for that fight, and I don't remember why. I don't know what went on during that time that it was so hard. But they took us out after I made weight. They took us. I think I went out to eat with the promoters, if I remember correctly. I made weight after everyone else because at first I didn't make weight, and I didn't make weight, and then I went back to the hotel and or maybe we were at the hotel already. I don't remember, but I ended up making it late at night, and then we went out and grabbed something to eat. It was probably they probably uh, they were just waiting for me to make weight, and they decided to go to some meeting. They invited us to go, and I'm sitting down at the table with them, and I remember this because it was the worst my body ever got. My arm cramped up and like my forearm cramped up, and I reached over and I grabbed it. As soon as I grabbed my forearm, this forearm cramped up,
Ooh.
and now both my arms are cramping up, and I kind of like, ugh, and then my bicep cramped, and my whole body started to just shut down and start everything. And I've never had this happen. I've had legs cramp, but I've never had and I had to jump up and I walked outside real quick. And one of my teammates, and I don't remember who it was now, comes out there, hey, what's up? And I couldn't stop moving because anytime I would try to slow down, my legs would start to lock up. And he would bring me cups of water as I'm walking around and help me drink. And my whole body, I was probably near death. I mean, my whole body was shutting down on me. And I don't know how I got through it. I mean, I don't remember exactly. I don't, I've been to the hospital a couple times for cuttings for IVs, but I don't think I went that night because my wife wasn't with me during this time. But it was bad. I mean, it was terrible. And I don't think I ever tried to make that weight again after that. So Ackerman and I are fighting, and I think again I'm taking him down on top kind of thing, and just dying, just gassing out, and and I know that I must have looked bad because one of the guys that was working for running that event comes over to my corner, and I could hear it saying, "How is he doing?" And they were worried about my health because I looked so bad that night when we went out to eat, and but that's part of the game, right? I mean,
Yeah, no,
you
the
know,
weight cutting is a science. If you screw it up, it could go wrong for you.
yeah.
Now,
So
was that Rich Santoro? Do you remember
you
Rich?
know that sounds familiar. You're bringing up names I haven't heard in such a long time. But yeah, I think it was Rich Santoro. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, he
it's
was the Shudo representative in the States, kind of the
yeah,
official guy there. So very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff. Now, Ackerman, like, you take a loss at the end of the day, he turned out to be a good guy. So,
yeah,
you can kind of couch it. Now, you go back on the road here and you get, another one of your patented winning streaks where you run off a whole bunch of fights that you win. And then you run into another little hard spot, but every name in this spot here is big and recognizable, and somebody you're doing some promoter a favor coming in and fighting their guys here. Well, you took a draw with Josh Neer. Do you remember that fight? Because Josh is another.
yeah,
Tell about
yeah.
that. I mean, Josh is a UFC veteran, a UFC legend. Really, some of the fought the Nate Diaz fights. Fought
Didn't he
wars with
beat
Spencer
Galar?
Fisher.
Did he beat Galar by triangle, or is that Rich I'm thinking of?
I can check it. I'll check it
Yeah,
for you. Near the triangles would be unusual.
yeah. I can't remember, but regardless, when people ask me who was the toughest guy that I've ever fought, you know, I used to be really quick and say it was Josh Neer. Like he's not the most accomplished, and surely there's some guys that we could name that may be, at least at that time, more skillful. But man, Josh is just, like he would have fit in perfect growing up in Stockton with the Diaz brothers. I mean, and he went out there and trained with those guys after they
Oh yeah.
fought, and it was just a perfect, they would have been perfect teammates. And I really like Josh quite a bit. We never became friends or anything, but incredibly tough. Tough. I mean, I hit him, and he would just, and he'd walk forward, and I scored all the takedowns. I think it might have been only 2 or 3 takedowns, and he would just come forward and eat everything I threw, and he'd land some good shots. And here's another crazy story. So, and Josh knows this by now, and I told Josh after he joined our gym, I'm working as a doorman at Banana Joe's. And almost all the fighters in the Quad Cities, they all got jobs as bouncers at strip clubs or whatever. Anyways, a broken bottle, the end of a broken bottle. There was a big fight at Banana Joe's, and I ended up cutting my heel. A lot of those fights and those big crowds, I was getting my feet, my shoes and stuff stepped on, and my foot came out of my shoe, and I ended up stepping. I'm barefoot fighting, trying to throw people out. I ended up stepping on a broken bottle, but it was the bottom of the bottle, so it was sticking up, and it cut a huge gash in the heel of my foot. And I went to the hospital. They had to wash it out, and they had to sew the bottom of my heel. Well, I had this fight coming up with Josh, and I shit you not, I'm in the gym and I'm running around with a sock on, and I'm running on the tip of my to make weight. I'm running on my tippy toes on my right foot because my heel has got stitches in it, right?
Wow.
Look, we didn't cancel fights, right? This scar right here, this scar, I broke right before I went into the UFC. I couldn't tell you how many fights I broke or how many fights I fought while this was broke and kept re-breaking, and I would still take the fights because I was fighting soft competition. I already knew the promoter would tell me, "Hey, come in, beat up this can. I'll give you $500, pay your gas." Well, $500 was a lot of money for me at the time, right?
Hmm.
So I didn't need this hand. I would just show up, hit him with this hand, take him down. It would be an easy fight, right? So it was no big deal. Uh, so the Josh fight, my corner man was Ryan Antle. You can look him up. And Ryan and I were good buddies. And he helps tape up my foot where you couldn't see. You'll see I got ankle wraps. I tape it up. So that wasn't noticeable. But all the way leading up to that fight, I couldn't put any weight on my heel because now I might have had the stitches taken out right before, but the week leading up to it, I was running around on the tip. It was who in the hell does that?
Yeah,
I
no,
mean, it doesn't
you,
make any sense, does it?
you might consider postponing the fight or telling him you can't
No.
take this one.
Hey, look, my wife's in school to become a nurse. She's pregnant with my son. The money,
Yeah, the
we
$500
need the
plays a
money.
big role. Yeah,
You know what I'm saying? And I was getting paid so little. You would go and listen. I would have fought 4 times a week if you had paid me $500, and
sure.
I'd show up. And I didn't know how good Josh was. A lot of these fights, I was beating up these. We call them cans.
Yeah,
Nobodies. Well, you paid me $500 to drive 2 hours to a show. You paid my gas. You covered my medical, and then you give me $500 to beat up some nobody. Well, that's about what I was making working all week as a maintenance man at the hotel. You know what I'm
sure.
saying?
Sure,
Well,
yeah,
I'll
for
do
sure.
that. I might do it tomorrow if someone offers me if they give me some nobody and want to pay me some money. Well,
Yeah.
why wouldn't I? You know,
Yeah, no,
you know.
and to be honest with you, in Iowa, I'm going to bring up a name that's controversial. We won't go there, but Travis Fulton, you mentioned Cedar Rapids and stuff. He was the perfect example of a guy. He'd fight Thursday, Friday, Saturday, take home a couple $100 each time. But hey, at the end of the weekend, you have $1,000. That gets you by in Iowa, and
Hey, hey, listen, it's you could be a bum. You could be a bum living on welfare. Listen, not everybody living on welfare is bums, but there's a lot of them. Or I can drive to Illinois and beat up somebody for $500 and come home. Well, listen, my wife's in school. I'm trying to be responsible. I work as a hotel maintenance man. I bounce on the weekends. And then the only time I'm not bouncing on the weekends is when I have to leave to go beat up somebody for $500, $600. Well,
yeah,
yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm do it every weekend.
yeah, for
And
sure.
and listen, and I got paid that kind of money to fight Josh. I didn't know Josh was as tough as he was. I don't know if anybody did.
Yeah, that's
It,
the risk of those days is that every once in a while you meet a match that's a serious guy. You met a lot of those guys, but yeah, you've got some fights in between that you can tell. You're getting a payday. Like I found a fight when you had like 50 fights that the guy never fought before. So that's
yeah.
pretty. That's a good easy payday for Joe Jordan that back in the day.
Why?
Which
Hey, listen. Why would I not?
yeah,
You know.
in fact you kind of deserve an easy day with some of these fights that you had here. Because
Hey,
the
hey,
next
just being a punching bag for those guys at the military gym. I deserved an easy fight. For a few $100, right?
yeah, yeah, for sure. That you were around the pros and you could hang with them, and that's a little bit of the problem. Is now Monty, he's around there and stuff, and now Monty all of a sudden calls you up again. And he's like, "Hey, I got a fight for you," and this time he's slipping you into a tournament, and you happen to fight Roger Huerta and George Jurgel on the same night.
Sure,
So
sure.
talk about
Listen, of course, this wasn't by chance. George gets to fight a guy that he's already beaten, and then my first round fight is Roger Herta. Which happens to be a pretty. He ended up proving that he was a pretty good fighter,
Sure.
and
He's the guy for people who may not remember the name, but he's the guy who actually wound up. Was it the cover of Sports Illustrated or?
yep,
Yeah,
first one.
he was the first guy on the cover of Sports Illustrated as a UFC fighter. A good-looking Hispanic kid. Helped him
Yep.
get that spot, but he was a hell of a fighter as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, he had those. I think what was like Fight of the Night with Guida, or
Yeah.
listen, he was a big star. There's no doubt about it. And if you can go on, I think you can find the fight on Daily Motion. Right, it's like a YouTube, and it was uploaded there. And my cornerman was Robbie Lawler
Okay.
that night, and I don't think Matt Hughes was. The referee was Rich Franklin, UFC champ Rich Franklin, and it was a pretty. It was a fairly even fight between me and Roger, with the exception of he gets really wild with his punches, and I just kind of just faded back, and when my back would hit the cage, I'd hit him with hard left check hooks, and I was hitting him flush and hitting him hard with left hooks. And at one point in the fight, he turns. This is towards the end. He turns and he's out on his feet, and he turns his back to me, and he's trying to find the cage, and he grabs a hold of it to keep himself from falling. And I'm trying to throw punches at the back of his head and then his body, and he turns around, and we embrace in a body lock position. And and I made the same mistake with Jens. I had Jens hurt. I had him where I thought I could have finished him. Um, you might not have seen the full fight of Jens and I, because uh, uh, Jason Reinhardt, who was part of the military gym, fought in the UFC. He was videotaping and shit talking me the whole time. We're buddies now, but at the time he was shit talking me the whole time. He he uploaded the fight after I hit Jens and hurt him, and Jens turns, grabs his face, walks towards the referee in the ropes. He thought I eye gouged him, but I hit him with an uppercut that went into his eye socket, and he thought he got eye gouged real bad. So he was hurt. And instead of following up with punches, instincts, I shoot in to take Jen's Pulver down. Well, that guy's almost impossible to take down. I didn't know that at the time. And that was that small window. With the good guys, a lot of times you get this small window and you don't capitalize. Same in wrestling, right? Very few opportunities. When you pass those up, bad things happen. And
Yeah.
with Jens, it wasn't my night at the end. But with Roger, and I got sidetracked. With Roger, I scored all the takedowns. I took him down twice, landed the cleaner shots. He was more active. And on that night, you said I had a draw with him. On that night, they announced, and the winner is, you can go to Daily Motion and type it in and watch it, Joe Jordan. I'm declared the winner. They raised my hand. I
Wow.
advanced to the finals against Roger Herta. Now,
No, George
oh,
Urgell.
yeah, Georgia J. Hey, months later, I'm checking my record. The fight's a draw.
Oh man, that's unbelievable.
The fight got changed. Listen, there's no commission up there at the time, right? And it's it's whoever's crew's running it, right? So somehow, my win with Roger Herta got changed to a draw. He makes it to the UFC before I do. And
Wow.
forever it's going to be a draw on it. Hey, look, you go to Daily Motion, you look it up, and I don't know. Some guy named Cox something was the promoter of the event, and Roger Herta was being trained by who was the UFC champ from Minnesota with the tats that Monty managed. Uh, uh, First 170 pounder. They gosh.
From Minnesota.
Yeah,
Holy.
I'm pretty sure he was from Minnesota. Lived up in Minnesota. I think he trained with Sean Shirk's coach also. It wasn't Shirk. It was another guy who was up there. He was one of Monty's guys, and he was training Roger Hurt. And I'm pretty sure Roger was one of Monty's guys also, just like George was.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Well, I was going to mention here with the George fight. That's your tournament final.
yes,
You mentioned Rich Franklin was the referee at first, and I'm curious, was he the referee for the George Urgell
Of
fight? Because
course.
George Urgell was his. That's funny because George was his. You know, Rich learned jujitsu from George.
Things were a little different back then.
That's crazy, man.
You
I
could,
mean,
you could get away with that stuff. So I'm fighting. So before this, I'm fighting Roger. Roger's throwing, 1,000 knees, and I'm blocking them, and I'm rolling with the punches. But my forearms and elbows took a lot of punishment, and uh, and out of that shell, I would hit him with left hooks. But I blocked a lot of them. So I go backstage and my arm stiffens up on me. It starts to swell where I blocked all those knees. And I couldn't bend my arm to get it to my face. And my wife is backstage with me and we're moving, we're working my arm, and we finally get it to where I could hold it up, but I couldn't really touch my face. Can you still hear me?
yes, sir.
Yeah. So I couldn't hold it up all the way to my face, but I could get it up pretty high, enough where it looks like I'm gonna protect myself. And I go out there and Georgelle and I are circling around, and George throws a high kick. It catches me right in my elbow. My arm drops straight down. And if you watch the fight with me and Georgelle, it's on Daily Motion as well. I, I it looks like I'm getting ready to slip a punch. I'm rolling my shoulders and I throw my arm up and I grab it and I pull it to my face because I couldn't raise it up on my own. And by this time, it was done. It was the straw that broke the camel. So I'm holding my arm and I switch to my right lead and I shoot from like 45 miles away to take George down. And anybody in the world could have saw it coming. And but I was hurting so bad. I was like, if I get kicked one more time, that I'm gonna die. And I shoot in, he catches me in the guillotine. I can't reach up and fight it. And not to George had a great career afterwards, so he doesn't need to brag about beating someone like me. But for a while, I'm pretty sure he thought that he kicked or broke my arm, right? And
Sure.
but listen, Roger gets 100% credit for that. If it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't be able to go out to the ring because Robbie was my corner man. But in between the fights, he was out there selling T-shirts, trying to make some money at the time.
Sure.
And so I had no one backstage with me except for my wife. And she's 98 pounds at that time, right? And we're back there just working my arm. Like I have to be able to hold it up to my face or I can't go out there. And but anyways, that's a true
Yeah,
story.
yeah, that's paying your dues for sure. This is what I meant at the beginning of the interview about a guy who's an unsung hero because you know some guys might not take that fight, and then you've got a promoter with a show with a tournament that doesn't finish, and good guys there and stuff like that, and Joe didn't miss a heartbeat, in making that decision to go out there and stuff, and that's why you can literally say you saved that show. So definitely my hat's off. Now at some point here you actually it looks like you fought Cola Coca twice. You got a rematch shortly after that with him in
Yeah,
Super Brawl. You went back to
yeah,
Hawaii.
yeah. So these you know if you fight long enough, everything that can happen will eventually happen. You have 10 fights, whatever, like maybe you don't experience much. If you have 60, 70, 80 fights, and there's so many fights because, just back then, a lot of stuff wasn't reported. If you stick around long enough, everything that can happen, it will end up happening to you. The first time I fought Colo, Jeremy Horn, you remember Jeremy Horn? Yeah, right?
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, of
sure.
course, everybody knows him, right? He was the referee, and I'm doing this real boring BS, big slam, take him down, not doing nothing on top, coasting easy to a win. And Colo, it was co-main event, also, I'm pretty sure. And on that same card was Tim Sylvia, Rich Franklin. No, not yeah, Rich Franklin was on the card. Uh, I think Wes Sims was on the card.
Yeah, West
Uh,
fought Tim on the
yeah,
rematch.
yeah, yeah. Tim Sylvia, yeah. And I got to hang out with Mark Coleman, So it was a good, it was a lot of fun, right?
Yep.
Uh, so during one of those boring breaks, me laying and praying and doing nothing, Jeremy Horn steps in and says, break, break, stand it up. And he looks and he turns and he looks at the timekeeper and calls time. And he might have, I'm pretty sure he called time, and he might have, I don't know what he was going to do, but it might have been warning me for doing nothing, right? Other than taking him down, and I'm going to win an easy fight. Because Cole is a big striker. He TKO'd Bart Pelajewski, from Jeff Kern's place.
Yep. We're
Uh,
about to
you
get
know,
to him
it,
too.
yeah, Bart's a tough dude, right? So to beat Bart, especially striking wise, you got to be good. And as Jeremy turns, I'm down on one knee, one hand on the mat, kind of in a crouch position like a catcher in baseball, right? I'm down in that position. I'm tired, and because I've been wrestling this guy to death. Colo stands up and he walks off to the side of me, just out of my view, and he soccer kicks me in the face and gets TKO and gets disqualified. Jeremy turns around. I'm going across the mat and I get up, face is busted. And he's like, the fight's over. It
Wow.
was just like, are you serious? And I went over to his corner, and I believe it was one of the Inoue brothers that was over there. I think it was the bigger one,
Okay. And
because they were definitely two different sized brothers. And I went over and he's shit talking. He's not like apologizing for his guy, getting DQ'd. Those brothers, they were legit tough guys.
oh yeah.
Like outside of the ring, they have no problem scrapping with anyone. And he's shit talking me, and I'm like, what are we talking about? He's the one that broke the rules. Like, but anyways, so the second fight, TJ. So I won that fight. He got DQ'd, and I thought people were happy with my performance because I was hitting these big takedowns, big slams. And TJ sits down after the event, TJ Thompson, and he says, "Well, I guess I'm gonna have to have you back one more time, even though I don't want to." And I went, "What are you talking about? I'm 2-0 here.
Hmm.
Like I should. I'm getting ready to fight for a title. I'm two. Like I beat both your guys in co-main. He went, yeah, but you're beating my ticket sellers and you're boring to watch. And I've never had a promoter up until that point ever say, just because you're winning, you know, like they
Yeah.
could care less if I was winning.
Yeah.
It's I thought I was doing something right, and they were like, no, it's like you're beating our guys that makes me money, and you're boring when you do it. It's like the worst combination, and that stuck with me. Like I've never forgot it. It was like yesterday. I'm like,
Yeah.
light went off. I'm like, wow, like this is the business that I didn't understand,
Yeah.
and
And it's prevalent in the business, because a guy like yourself, if you let Joe Jordan play your game, Joe Jordan is in the fight, or play his game rather. Joe Jordan's in the fight against just about anybody in the world.
sure,
You know what I mean? And yeah, that should be good enough for you to get to a title shot and that whole thing. But then there's this other X factor where, you know, in Hawaii, most of the guys are boxers. They've got a little bit of boxing pedigree, so wrestling non-existent, so they consider wrestling boring.
Yeah.
Like you said, if you're doing the slams and things like that, you really can't. You got to put that feeling aside. But hey, they're selling tickets and making money, and TJ's got more money than I do. So what do I know? You know what I mean?
Hey, listen, he's done well for himself, and it's what he was saying was true for him. It was right for him, and listen, he was right, because later on I'm in that same business,
Yeah,
and I could I could give two shits how good of a fighter you were. I
yeah,
was just worried about, as TJ said, it's all about how many butts you can put in seats, and you could be the biggest bum in the world, but if you could sell 10,000 tickets, guess what? You're going to be undefeated for as long as they can keep you undefeated to keep selling those tickets, and that's just how it is,
yeah.
and these people. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say, especially on the regional or the B circuit. Not to
Yeah,
disrespect it, but where really that's the most important thing because you don't have the continuity of the UFC and stuff. And we're about to get to your UFC fight, but first there are a couple others I want to talk to here. You did meet Bart Palazewski, who is a Jeff Curran student and
yeah,
a guy who became a very tough guy, on the circuit there. What was that fight like? Because you took a few months off after Cola, and he was your first fight back.
yeah. So I won the first period, lost the second period, and then the third period I thought I lost. I thought I won. Um, Uh, Bart landed more punches. I scored more takedowns. I stayed on top longer than he stayed on his feet. He the second period he landed a really good. The first time I've ever been hurt to the body was from Bart, and he hit me with. I think before I went to one knee, he hit me. I think with four like liver. He left hook liver shots, and first couple hurt, but it didn't show it. But his cornermen saw me dip a little bit on that side, and they picked up on it, and he was yelling at him to go back to it, and nowhere near, coming close to quitting or getting TKO'd. The referee thought when I went down to one knee and I kept my hands up, yeah, he was throwing a lot of punches. I was upright, my back against the cage, and I forget the referee's name, but he was a correctional officer in Illinois and refereed a lot of Monty's events. I wish I could remember his name, but as I'm getting punched, I'm waving my finger above my head like this. I think his name was Todd, and I'm
Okay,
waving my finger at him, and he thought I was waving the fight off.
Todd
So he
Fredrickson.
said, Todd Fredrickson, yeah, that's another name I haven't heard in such a long time. Um, so he prematurely stops the fight with like a couple seconds left. So this is crazy. So he stops it, and I'm like, "What are you doing?" And I know him, and I look over at Monty. I said, "What is going on?" And Monty knew that I was waving the Todd that I'm okay. Don't stop it.
Yeah,
So they restart the fight in the third period after it was being waved off as a TKO. You can't do that nowadays.
yeah,
If the referee makes a mistake, so what, right?
hey,
But
look
I
at what
got it.
happened to Robbie Lawler with Ben Askren.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's just crazy when the commission is not involved and the rules you can make up on the fly.
Yeah,
Uh, but that's what happened that night. And it's on DVD. Somebody has that on DVD. I used to have it, and I've lost it somewhere over the many moves I've had.
sure.
But so they restarted, and I thought I won the third period, but it took place in Crystal Lake or the town right next to it. There's a few little small towns at northern part of Chicago.
Yeah,
And there was no way I was going to win the decision, right? But if that had
Linkmore,
took place,
Illinois.
yeah, if that took place in my hometown and my coach was managed by Monty, the promoter, guess what? I'd have been the winner that night. You know what I'm saying?
Okay, it's funny. I have a funny Todd Fredrickson story. He refed a Fulton fight in uh Utah, and Travis was fighting a guy that was probably 30 pounds lighter. Came in with karate pants, and really shouldn't have been fighting. It was still those days, and Fulton kind of picked him up and just dropped him on his back with a
I've
big
seen that.
slam. Okay. So the fight's over. It's a kind of a famous fight because the guy actually jumps over Travis in the opening
Yeah.
sequence. Um, so Travis is sitting there, and Todd's about to raise his hand. Todd's the referee, and Travis says, "Man, I hope I didn't hurt that guy." And Todd goes, "That boy sure did smell." Just goes to show
But
Todd's one of
Todd
those
Thomas
a unique guy, definitely a unique guy.
for sure, and I don't know how many countless events that he refereed for us when I
Yeah,
was working for Monty,
yeah.
and got to know him well. Always had a friendly relationship with him, and I forget his wife's name, but she was the mother to Brandon Addison.
Okay,
He was one of the guys. High voltage was his nickname. He was one of the guys that fought and trained at the Militias gym. Yeah.
okay, cool. Now as we go on here, obviously after the Bart win, you bounce back, and you did take 6 months off, but you bounced back and you started running off wins again, including a Iowa Challenge, a win there, and things. And then all of a sudden you run into Clay Guida at the Extreme Fighting Organization, the XFO.
Yeah.
And this is also back in the Lakemore, in the same building actually that you fought Bart Balazewski in. What was this like? Because Clay's another local Chicago guy, and Clay turned into a huge UFC run.
Well, so for the fight, I figured if I could stop Clay taking me down, that was my biggest concern was taking him not taking me down. That I could outstrike him enough to win the fight. And UFC champion Matt Hughes was my corner man for that fight. And you know, first couple rounds where he didn't take me down. Maybe we were close to being even on striking. You've seen it where one guy where he's really worried about getting taken down, he doesn't let his hands go freely. And it makes a mistake of always being worried and being hesitant throwing. Um, but in the second period, I believe it was second, Clay got to my legs and he got his hands locked below my butt cheeks. And I know for sure he was going to pick me up and he was going to run me back to the middle and slam me. So I take my hands and I reach behind my butt cheeks and I grab a hold of the cage. And the referee is yelling at me to let go of the cage. And I was like, no, I'm not letting go of the cage. And he's like, I'm going to take a point away. And I was like, I'm not letting go of the cage. I'm not letting Clay Guida pick me up after I've stopped all these takedown attempts. You go ahead and take that point. That's what I'm thinking to myself because you're not picking me up. Like I've never had anyone pick me up in a fight and run me back to the middle and slam me. And Clay was not going to do it. Okay, and so they stopped the fight. They take 1 point away, and I go back, and Matt's like, I don't know who's winning. There's a possibility you're losing because of that point. And it's like this is a close fight, and I went okay.
Yeah.
And I said, all right, I'm gonna change plans. I'm gonna take Clay down, and I took him down like look, I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but I took him down like he's a little schoolgirl, like easy. Like I shot in, and I might have surprised him, right? Because the whole fight I didn't try, and I took him down. I took him down so easy that I'm like, I'm a damn fool for not trying to do this the first 2 rounds, right? Whole career on the road, driving to other people's towns and fighting their best guys. So it is what it is.
Now let me ask you: do you still follow the UFC? Do you watch the UFC?
You know, just I follow results. I watch some highlights. So I can't tell you the last time I sat down and watched a full card. My boy is not just good. He's like in the 1% good. And that's not being a proud dad. That's just what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes because my son is not physically gifted. He wasn't a freak athlete. Uh, it takes all of our time, all of our effort.
Okay, now we're
You
gonna
know,
get to Barrick. Don't worry about
yeah, sure. Well, no,
that.
what I'm telling you is the reason why I mentioned it is just all the time and effort has been watching wrestling, traveling to events, and so on. So that free time of going and watching UFC, I just any minute that I have, we're watching some Russians, we're watching some Japanese kids wrestle, and we're trying to pick up new skills. It's a 24/7 deal.
Okay, and that's admirable. So, you say you look at highlights, you look at results and stuff like that. You kind of follow the sport a little bit. How did it feel for you? Was it, I get the sense that you'd be satisfied watching a guy like Clay Guida, appear on 2025 UFC cards and that sort of stuff. Did you ever think, that could have been you, or, or did you at least think that, I know I'm on that level, I'm comfortable with that? What was your thought pattern seeing guys? Because you got a few guys that did that to you.
Yeah, the difference, the biggest difference, and we haven't talked about this yet. And I don't know if you know it or not, but did you know I had open heart surgery?
No, I didn't. When was
Okay,
that?
yeah, yeah. It was 5 years ago at the Mayo Clinic. I
Okay.
went to the best hospital I could get at the time. Spent a lot of money because I had a rare condition I was born with. But Clay. Listen, I know nothing about. I know Clay's brother, but I know nothing about his family, his wife, his kids. I don't know if he has kids, but a lot of those a lot of those guys, because I train with some of them, uh, it's you sacrifice a lot to be that good, and you live a lifestyle where it's the most important thing to you. And for me, what was most important to me was my family. And I've been, I've always been family first. It's been a big deal. Uh, and listen, and I never had good conditioning, and I never really, I just thought maybe I just wasn't working hard enough. But I had one of my coronary arteries grew in the wrong spot, and it's been this way from before I was born, and it grew in an area where it was getting pinched. So the bottom part of my heart was being starved of blood and oxygen,
Wow.
and man, I never felt great, competing. I never felt like I could outwork someone or outpace someone. And then you would see me laying up against the rope, or the cage, and I'd be taking shots and trying to move and hit people with some slick counters. But it wasn't until oh man, I was probably 40, and I was driving a semi truck in Phoenix, making deliveries for an electrical company. I worked for an electrical company, and I started having some problems carrying some of those heavy reels of wire, electrical wire and stuff. And I was delivering that stuff. I'd clock in at 4 in the morning. I was done by 1 in the evening, all city driving. And one day I came home feeling terrible. And my wife, who happens to be a cardiac nurse, she sends me to the hospital and tells them that we got to find out what's going on. And she made them run some tests, and then they found it. They put this dye in me, and then they saw what it was. I'm My case is the 1% of all cardiac patients. So instead of going to just any doctor, we paid a lot of extra money out of pocket when we went to the Mayo Clinic, and everybody knows the Mayo Clinic, or you
Sure.
should. It's one of the best hospitals in the world and the country for sure. And they performed the open heart surgery for me,
Okay.
and it lasted for about 1 year. And then I was before I moved out here, we were looking to go to the Cleveland Clinic for a follow up open heart surgery. So it's been an ongoing thing.
Okay. And then now, what I take from that, and you mentioning that, is that because you had the artery like out of place, I'll
Yeah,
to say it,
yeah,
amateurishly, since you were
yeah,
born, that you could never get like I'll give you a similar example. It's obviously maybe not as serious, but you know Dennis Hallman.
Yeah,
Okay, Dennis has a pigeon chest. The yeah, that and that condition has always made him gas out.
sure.
He was never able to breathe well, and that sort of held him back. And he's a guy who submitted Hughes twice.
Yeah,
Now, so
yeah.
you're maybe mentioning to me that because you seem to be, with your wrestling and with your work ethic, you might have been a guy who could outwork people, and you didn't feel like you could because of your heart. Is that like you
Well,
felt held back?
no, I just felt like I just never did enough, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and people on the outside, and look, let's not, I'm not pretending that I did everything right, and this is the only reason why. I'm just telling you that, that it for sure caused me to develop habits. I would push myself, and I would, and I always felt. And listen, it's just hard to explain, but you if you watch my son wrestle, it's insane. It's insane at his pace and the way he attacks. And I was never able to do that. I was never able to push myself to that level because it's just it's nuts at the pace that he can compete at. And just thank the Lord that he wasn't born with the same issue that I had.
Sure.
Now, what? Listen, what part of my heart that functioned right? If I had done everything just right, would I have been a tremendously better fighter? Absolutely. And maybe I would have been successful, right? But it didn't help any that I was born with the bottom part of my heart not being supplied the blood it was supposed to. And it was severe enough for me to go to Mayo Clinic and have an open heart surgery done.
Sure.
And, I have the genetics where they went in and they looked, and I had no buildup. And I told the doctors, I said, this is impossible. I've eaten 10,000 cheeseburgers. How can I not have any buildup? And they went, genetics, cholesterol, and all that buildup is largely determined by genetics. You all heard stories about somebody who smoked and ate bacon their whole lives. They
And live
lived
to
to be
90.
100.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's genetics. We've all heard those stories. So
Sure.
largely, listen. And as they find out more, we're learning that genetics is really plays the biggest part in our health. So
Yep. No. And so let's get back on track here. So you take the
yeah,
loss to Guida, you take it with it, but you get right back on there. You start another winning streak. You go ahead, you take out a few guys like John Strawn was a tough guy, no name and stuff like that. Now you put together 5 or 6 wins, and you finally get the call to UFC.
yeah.
Talk about how that comes up because you fought Hermes Franca and talk about that experience.
Yeah, and this was the Hermes before partying and getting in trouble and deported, and Hermes before the purple and green hair. This is the Hermes that TKO'd Spencer Fisher,
Yeah.
uh, that would go on and do that and go on and fight for the title. So, I was fighting a top shelf guy. I'm sitting at the house. I'm recovering from this scar here on my right hand. I had I don't know, it was a couple of weeks before I had broke this right hand in a fight in one of Chad Bergmeyer's events. And Chad's a great guy, by the way. And so I'm sitting at the house. They did surgery. They put plates in and screws, and the stitches had been just taken out. And I've got this big pink scar on my hand. And Monty calls me up. I said, "Hey, Roger Herta got hurt. I whooped Roger up in Minnesota, and said he's got hurt, trained with Matt Hughes, I believe, and you want to fill in for him." And I went, "Yeah." He said, "Are you in shape?" I went, "Yeah." And I lied. I was way overweight, and I was never in great shape anyways. So that wasn't a big deal. But, so we had a doctor at the gym. I won't say his name. I went to him for my pre-fight physical or my physical and stuff that I had to do before I went out. And we came up with a plan that we were just going to tell him that the scar was from sheet metal. I cut my hand at work. And so I got my blood work and all that stuff turned in. I go fly out to Vegas. The doctors out there, they do another pre-fight physical before you get in the cage. And I told him the same thing. They're like, yeah, whatever. They didn't care. As long as my blood pressure was good, and so I get in there and we start fighting. And listen, my hand's many weeks away from being healed. I hit him. It breaks my hand again. I could feel when I made a fist. I could feel like I had a knuckle back here. If you've ever broke that first metacarpal, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, it just feels like you got a little hinge here, and it's just right. And it was a good fight. Randy Couture was one of the commentators for the show, and Randy gave me the first round, and that's good enough for me. I don't care what the scores. I don't care what anybody says. If Randy says you won the first round, then I'll take that. Then I lost the second, came out in the third, and I was fired up. I was yelling at him a little bit and did my best Ric Flair, woo, and I was ready to stand there and freaking he takes me down, and I just didn't have enough gas to get back up. I was exhausted, and the fight was on 2 weeks' notice. And he gets mount, goes triangle, hits a topside triangle on me, wins a fight of the night bonus. I was joking around. If I'd have known that, I could have gave it to him in the first period, and we could have just split the money. And, I wouldn't have to. He broke my nose somewhere in the second. You'll see if you watch the fight, you'll see him hit me clean with overhand right, and I reach up, I grab my nose, and I'm moving it around. I'm like, all right. It was a good fight, though.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
got into the third round with him.
yep. No, and he later won the UFC belt, and the bottom line is, you know, nowadays both the winner and the loser of the fight of the night get the bonus. So
Yeah,
just another one of those bad luck, bad wrong
sure.
place at the wrong time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um, and here's a remark, you got good props. I think Dana also complimented you about the fight afterwards, which,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He told me it was a good fight, good scrap, and I probably would have, I might have gotten invited back, I took the fight on short notice. I went out there and gave up my nose and busted my hand again, and and all that stuff to help out with the card, But last minute they had to change the weight because I couldn't make the weight. Listen. I mean, if it was my chance to fight in the UFC, I would lie again tomorrow and tell you I could make 55, and I'd show up and do the best I could. But I was too far out of shape at the time to make it. They had to renegotiate the weight with Hermes' camp, and he accepted, a catch weight, and it might have been 165, 160. I don't remember exactly, but whatever it was. I mean, it was obvious. If you look at me, in the fight, I'm pale white with the exception of a farmer's tan, and I got love handles, and I was nowhere near being in shape for to being on a card like that. And that was at the time it was the most watched event because that was Andre Arlovsky and Tim Sylvia's third fight, and I believe it was Ken Shamrock and Tito Ortiz's second or
wow,
third fight also. So it
wow.
was a big time card for back then.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Now here comes the amazing part. They didn't call you back, and
Yeah,
that's kind of one of those things that a lot of people would be bitter about. You don't sound totally bitter. You sound like you accept that, but you put in the work. That's it. Let's just be honest about this because after
sure.
after you look, a lot of people that fall back and fight on smaller shows after going to the UFC, you start to see the losses start to pile up every once in a while. You start to see maybe that they're not taking it as seriously and stuff. But Joe Jordan still had his pride because you went out and you came back after that loss with like something like a 15 fight winning streak, and that call never came. Was that winning streak motivated by going back to the big show, or was it something that it just is not in your nature to go down easy?
No, no. I mean, look, I mean, my wife was in school. My kid. He's I don't know. He was 1, 2 years old.
Sure.
I was making a little money at the job I had, and I was bouncing on the weekends, and when I wasn't bouncing, I was taking whatever fight I could get. And the pay wasn't great back then, and I could go and fight. I could fight every weekend, and back then there were so many shows to fight in Iowa and Illinois and Indiana. I could make okay money, fighting every week, every week and every Saturday, even with a busted hand, because, I don't know how many. I'd have to bring my wife in, because my memory's not so great, but she would be able to tell you how many fights that I fought with this hand not repaired,
Yeah.
or they would repair it, and then I'd have a fight, and I would take a fight before it was repaired, and I've cut that cast off. I don't know how many times. There's few things that bothers me. I can't stand to have a cast on my hand. I can squeeze inside of caves, like when you wouldn't think I could fit. That doesn't bother me. But having my hand trapped in a cast, just I've cut them off so many times, and I've taken fights that I shouldn't have. That it's just silly.
And I know that in Iowa, there's an amazing amount of fights, from Tama to Cedar Rapids to Cedar Falls to all over the
Yeah,
place. And most of them are not even documented on your record, probably. But just after the Hermes fight, which was in July, he came back, fought September 14th, September 30th, October 7th, October 14th, October 28th. So he's not kidding around when he says fighting, weekend to weekend, December 9th, December 16th. Then he takes Christmas off, comes back January 20th, January 27th, then March 9th, March 31st, April 13th. Not he's the the proof backs up everything that you're saying there. And again, this is just you're fighting guys that you're better than, but it
sure.
becomes a monetary situation. And I understand
Well,
that. You're getting $500. To mention an Iowa fighter that kind of was the model for that. And we won't get into his controversies, but Travis Fulton was the guy who'd
sure.
come into your place. He'd fight Thursday, Friday, Saturday if they let him. And I think that's the model where it's like, hey, if you're making $300 for a fight, but you can get three of them in. Hey, that's almost $1,000. It makes a big difference.
My uncle, Richard Carter. He was a professional wrestler way back in the day in Minnesota when the Iron Anderson brothers and there was a bunch of other famous guys from Minnesota.
Sure, Vern Gagne, the Gagnes, Jim
Yeah,
Brunzell, yeah, Nick Bockwinkel, that whole scene.
um, and,
AWA.
and and he wouldn't deny, that pro wrestling was fake, but he said, what's not fake? Landing on your back in that ring night after night,
Yeah,
taking shots, getting bumps, and he said, "Listen, that stuff adds up." Listen, I fought a lot of cans, a lot of bums, right? But I also had a lot of promoters that came to me and said, "Listen, we don't want this. We don't want to pay you and the fight end in 30 seconds. We don't want to pay you for 1 minute. We want to pay you to come in because you can entertain, and we want the fight to last a little bit. Promoters want their money's worth, right?
sure,
And if I'm not selling tickets, if I'm not putting a lot of butts in the seats and making that promoter money, then he wants an entertainment value.
yeah,
And I would go out there and fight guys way bigger than me, and make them look good. I'd take punches, I'd take kicks to the body, and I'd stretch the fight out for them. And I've had them come to me and say, "Listen, like you're not going to be back on the card again if you go out there and you whoop this guy in 1 minute." He
sure.
says, "Because I want my crowd to be entertained. I want them to stay here, and that part's not fake.
No,
You
for
know,
sure. Now, let me
hey,
ask you:
I
Did you
took a
did
lot of shots.
for sure, for sure? And did you ever have the experience of winding up and going to a place where you're not the hometown guy, but now you've been there 4 or 5 times, and people do start to recognize you. People do start to go like, he's good, like, because that's a good feeling too.
Yeah, yeah. So when I was in Illinois, I fought in a XFO show that Dan Marty and Jeff Kern put together. So they did all of them, anyways. And uh, I had someone's wife that came over to me, and I think she was with her husband. She was like, you are my absolute favorite fighter to watch. And I went, yeah. She says, because you don't look like a fighter. She said, you look like one of us. And you get in there and you're whooping these guys that are all muscled up and all tough looking. And I wasn't insulted. I mean,
Sure,
that's
no, that,
I
yeah,
got, and listen, I got, I get it. I didn't have that build. But I tell you the funniest one, and you mentioned, did you mention Tama,
yeah,
Iowa?
Tam, Iowa.
That's the Indian reservation, right?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
up there.
that's where
Yeah,
Tyrone Roberts is from.
yeah. I haven't heard that name of that town in 15 years, right? And so it's bringing back a lot of memories. I had a woman come to me because I fought in that town. I had a woman come to me, and she thanked me so much for beating up this guy on one of those shows that was up there. And all I did to him to provide entertainment is I took some punches, and then all I would do is I'd open hand slap him. I just whack and slap the shit out of him. And I did this because one, it was entertaining for the crowd, and that was prolonging the fight. Well, the guy gets so demoralized that he just quits. And instead of continuing, I would just keep, and he just stopped. And apparently, he had been mean to her. They used to date. And she came, and I'll never forget it. Probably somebody that slapped her around at one time. And for her to see that was, I mean, she was so sincere. She wasn't drunk coming on to me. She was like, oh, thank you so much. As if I did it, as if I did it for her,
Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Those are the
but
things that happen on those smaller circuits. That that how do you keep going? Week after week and stuff like that. Little things like that will pick you up. I don't know. Do you remember a fighter from Illinois named Phil Johns?
short guy.
Yeah, real short little
Wrestler.
wrestler. Yeah,
Yeah.
he held the hook and shoot belt, and
Uh-huh.
um, I think he lost it to Hermes Franca in hook and shoot. But
Okay.
the bottom line is he would drive down to Indiana, and the by the fifth or sixth time he appeared, the Indiana crowd just loved him. So
Sure.
he was a hometown, not a hometown guy that won people over, and I thought you'd have the same effect, especially with how often you fought. Now, again, we're talking about a circuit where probably not all the fights are documented, but a lot of guys that don't get back to the UFC, as I mentioned, you start to see their records start to fade a little bit. Maybe they don't care as much. They start to lose. And, the losses add up. Guys with 50 fights wind up sometimes with 500 records and that sort of thing. That's not Joe Jordan's story. He went out with like a 27-3 run at the end. The last fight you came into, you did lose to James Krause, another guy who wound up in the UFC and the Big Show and stuff. But never a dull moment there with all those wins. And you kept your record up, 48-14 on the official record. Like I said, um, and we've mentioned this before too. The other problem with those smaller circuit shows is that they're probably not a lot. We probably have all your losses documented and a bunch of wins that aren't, because it's the losses that people remember or that happen
Right.
against maybe better guys. And you probably have
Right.
like 30 more wins as well. Uh,
Yeah. No. Look. If I sat down and told you, and if I brought my wife in here and she told you, people would still be like, no, no, there's no way you fought that big time. But it's you know, it's a lot of fights, a lot of, out of those, I box professionally as well. So I tell people I'm 50, 14, and 2. That way they could verify it. But I mean, what is that? 66 professional fights. I'm pushing 100, 100 without embellishing anything.
sure.
And to shows that were put together in abandoned schools with just no ring, no nothing, just mats and chairs, and they're charging admission. And I mean, it's we walking out on a dirt floor into a cage. I mean, it's stories that nowadays, when you watch the sport, people just they have a hard time believing. They just look at you, they think you're an old guy with a belly. You're telling those crazy stories, and
Yeah.
I'm like whatever. I
Yeah.
just
Do you follow WWE?
no. I mean, I know Brock Lesnar was in,
Okay,
and
I was
I
going
think
to mention one of those stories. There's a woman wrestler in WWE that also had 30 MMA fights. A girl named Shayna Baszler, not Ronda Rousey, but Shayna,
okay.
and she fought in
I
South
know.
Dakota. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah, because she's from the South Dakota that area, and when she fought in a show where you started with boxing gloves, but they wouldn't tie the boxing gloves. So when you wanted to grab it, you would just throw the boxing gloves off.
Sure.
What's the most ghetto thing you ever saw?
Oh, say that question again. What
Like the
was that?
most ghetto thing, the most weird or odd little thing that you remember like that.
Oh, I don't know if there was, I don't know if there was anything, as probably as far as listen, we fought in shows that didn't have any that plastic coating that's on the chain link fence, and
Sure.
they would have little burrs.
Yeah.
That chain link fence out in your yard, it's not perfectly smooth. There's little imperfections on it, and I had to take a teammate of mine who fought on the same card with me, Chris Griffin, from Lexington, Kentucky. I had to take him to the hospital because he was cut. I think he cut his forehead wide open. He was shooting a double leg, a really bad double leg, and the kid kind of sprawled and pulled him into the fence face first, and it cut him horribly wide open. But I mean, your back would get torn up.
Yeah.
It's not this nice stuff that we see today. Uh, but other than that, probably fighting in the abandoned school, running off the mats, and there would be boards missing in the floor as you walked out to the matted area, and falling into the crowd, and the crowd pushing you back onto the mat and fighting. That was probably the most.
That's
You know,
interesting.
I miss. Listen, and I feel terrible about this. I missed out on going bare knuckle. So you remember, those nice new gloves that we wear today, or what we used to wear. Back in the day, it used to be this thin little pad that didn't even like turn down the knuckles, and they had these four little loops that your fingers went in. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was it was barely a glove at all. And so wearing those, I got to fight under the rules and I've headbutted many people. And I tell you, if headbutting was still allowed, it would have fewer the rules would have suited me. Because I got a big old head and a thick neck. I could take punches to get close to you, and I think I would have. I think I would have headbutted a lot of folks late into my pro career if it had been allowed. I only got to experience it early on in Indiana.
Gotcha. Now let's talk, since he's a known name and a guy who did UFC. Talk about your last fight with James Krause. How do you feel you went out, and what
Yeah.
was the memory there?
So Mike Reddish, who took over ownership of the Militants Gym and changed the name to it, and I forget what the name he changed it to, and he ended up passing away of cancer at 40. I mean, he might have been my age, 45 years old. It's crazy. Um, he came into the gym and said, "Hey, Joe, um, the show out in where was that at?
Yeah,
Omaha, Nebraska area."
yeah, he's from down there. I'll look it up while you keep talking here.
Yeah, yeah. And he came in and said, "Look, they got this show against a pretty tough guy. Again, it was 2 or 3 weeks notice. and at least I was in the gym at this time, and said that if you take this fight at 170 pounds, they will they'll pay you this amount, and then they will guarantee bring you back for 2, 3 fights. So it was something like that.
Kearney,
And
Oklahoma.
what was it?
It says Kearney, Oklahoma.
Oh, yeah. Curdy. They got a good wrestling program there.
Okay.
That's right. And we fought in that hockey rink. That's where it took place. I'm pretty sure. And I said, yeah, sure. Let's if I can make a little bit of money. And I was just coming off of a neck injury. I'm getting older at this time, so I had to already went through a couple hand surgeries. I don't know if I had an eye surgery at that time, but I may have. But anyways, listen, James is 6'2". I'm 5'6", and uh, he did a really good job of staying long with his punches, and I just didn't have the footwork or speed to close that gap. And but look, I stayed out there. I took shots. It was fairly entertaining. I had at one point the crowd was cheering pork chop, and you know I got caught in a triangle. No, I got caught in a guillotine choke in the third period. So I
Okay.
gave the promoters their money's worth. I
Yeah.
didn't go out there. It wasn't a short notice fight that I was promised 3 follow up fights. I didn't go out there and lay down in the first period. I went out there and I was respectable for the first 2 periods, and in the third, I just listen. I was getting hit. I was getting tired, and I wrestled him down to the ground. And on the way down, he locked up a good guillotine, and that was his go-to signature finishing hold was his guillotine. But
Yep. No disrespect losing to James Krause. Now, how come that was they had promised you fights and you got it's a decent show. Um, how did you know it was the end?
well, so during that fight, if you watch in the first period, he throws a kick, and I block it, but he broke my finger here. He broke this middle knuckle, and it fractured like the inside part of where it bends. It wasn't a simple break, and this took a really long time. It took a surgeon. It took a long time for this to heal, for my finger to be right. There was a chance it was going to get fused in that spot, or they'd have to do a joint replacement or amputate it right here. That was like the three options. It was crazy, and so I get back into the gym after this hand surgery, and I'm feeling good. I'm moving around just fine, and I have somebody in a front headlock, and I go for a standing inside trip while I have a front headlock, and I blow out my ACL in the gym in practice, and I felt something pop. It didn't feel right, and I'd never had a blown ACL before. And so I go home. I come back later that night for a second practice at 6, and I'm moving around, and I step one way to change directions, and I felt this horrible pain, and I was like, oh no. Went to the docs. They said I blew out my ACL, a complete tear. So they end up taking part of my patella and, and fixing my knee. But look, at that point, I'm in my 30s. I just came off hand surgery. This eye, there was something wrong with it, and I didn't know what. Later on, I ended up having to have surgery on my eye while I was in Arizona. And my wife and I were like, "Look, all right, we're done," and I had started at that time training. I had stopped working for Monty at that time, and I went to I-80 truck stop. It was the world's largest truck stop, and I was training to be a diesel truck mechanic. And I was doing real basic stuff, changing tires, oil changes, greasing trucks, finding electrical wires that were broken, replacing them, just basic stuff. And anyways, my wife and I were like, look, there's no reason for us to stay here anymore, right? You're not going to be fighting anymore. You're not working for money. And I said, look, where do you want to go? And she says, well, there's Charleston, South Carolina. There's Woodlands, Texas, just north of Houston. These are some areas that we were interested in. And I said, okay, we'll pick one. And she's like, well, how about Scottsdale, Arizona? We've never lived in the desert before. And I went, all right, let's do it. Let's just, that was it. We started selling everything in the house. I rode my motorcycle all the way out to Arizona. She followed behind me in the car. We sent a bunch of stuff through the mail. We had no jobs. We just had money. And we roll in uh, to Scottsdale and just started looking for work. And we end up settling in a town called Gilbert, Arizona, which happens to be our favorite place that we've ever lived. It's beautiful out there.
For sure. Yeah.
And we stayed there for 7 years,
Yeah.
and that was it. It was just our time was up,
That,
we,
that's good that you made that good read, and it's nice. And now, let me just be clear about this for the people out there. At the very beginning of this story, when you were back in the Kentucky area, I think you came back to Kentucky from Ohio, and you
yeah,
said my girlfriend at the time.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is still that lady, right?
26 years, same woman.
Yeah, and that's something that you have to take your hat off to as well, especially being on the road and stuff. And here together, you make a decision to go to Arizona, and it's like a mutual adventure. So it strengthens what you said about family being first for you. So now let's get into that with Barrick, your son,
Yeah,
because
so
it's
go ahead.
just for the people out there who may not be aware. We're talking about, and I think he's about to graduate high school, but he's
Yep.
ended a very extreme decorated high school wrestling career, and he's probably one of the top three wrestlers in the country right now. Um, Slated to go to Oklahoma State, which is a power,
Oklahoma.
Oklahoma rather, which is a powerhouse wrestling group that they recruited him. He was heavily recruited, and Joe um, documents a lot of every one of his matches
Everything.
on Facebook. So fans like me have gotten to watch Barrick since he was, a sophomore or even a freshman in high school, coming up through the ranks, and it's been an amazing story. Joe, why don't you talk a little bit about the build up, how wrestling became a part of his life, and your influence in there.
Well, look, I think I said earlier when we started this, my high school coach became my legal guardian and gave me gave me something to be proud of, right? And it's stuck with me all these years. So look, my son was going to wrestle. There was no question in our household if he's going to grow up and be a wrestler. Uh, I'm lucky. And very few dads does this happen where dad's a coach and the kid doesn't have to be forced to go to practice, to go to competitions. I don't know how I got so lucky, but my kid's always been very agreeable. He's also been very quiet. And from an early age, past being 2 and 3 years old, he's mastered that skill of listening and doing. A lot of kids will listen, but they'll be doing things they're not supposed to. But he's really good at listening and doing what he was told. And there was nothing special about him in academics or athletics, but just through hard work, he's had success. And growing, he was born and raised in Iowa before he moved to Arizona, and that whole Dan Gable outwork everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in Iowa knows and preaches those same things in the gym. Well, my kid was that kid who listened and said, "Oh, okay, this is what I got to do," and that's what he did. And he has no trick moves. He's just a hard nosed, attacks at an insane rate and scores points. He in his weight class, He is the number one recruit in the whole country at his weight class in the graduation class of 2024. So just counting seniors, there he is the top blue chip recruit at 120 pounds. He'll wrestle in college at 125. If not all 5 years, 4 years, then at least the first couple years. He may grow into a 33 later on. He was recruited by Penn State, Iowa, everybody. Michigan sent down Kevin Jackson, Olympic gold medalist, to our house. Did an official visit with us. I flew to New York, and we had an official visit with West Point. They were going to put him in the preparatory school for it's less than a year. He had the prep school, but then he was going to go 4 years at West Point. And that's what I really, you know, if it was just me, my son would have graduated from West Point, but he has a mother, my wife, and so we're not sending our only child off to war someplace. She just couldn't do it. And I love, I don't mean to offend anybody out there that sent their kids off to war, but we got one kid, and I wasn't going to win that battle with my wife. And
That's
so
a good spot to take a loss.
yeah, for sure. Listen, John Smith is a legend. I mean, in my mind and people our age, he's the greatest wrestler of all time. 4 world championships, 2 Olympic golds. In 6 years, he was the best in the world, beating all the best Russians. And I know I knew he was getting close to retirement. We had an opportunity to move out, and I won't go into details, but I'll just say we had a lot of help with coming out to Oklahoma. If my son more if he verbally committed to wrestle at OSU, and he did, and we sold our house in Ohio. We came out, and what we didn't know is that the coach who recruited him out here, Zach Esposito, leaves and goes and takes a job in Colorado at the Olympic Training Center as a developmental coach. And then John.
There you go. Thank God you asked.
All right. So as I was saying, that Espo, who's been the assistant coach forever, and the guy in waiting to be the head coach, he takes off to Colorado. John hires his replacement, Coleman Scott, from North Carolina University. And, everybody knows it hasn't been officially announced, but we all know it's John's last year. And my son is graduating high school this year. So he's never going to wrestle for John Smith. Now, listen, John's been a great person to me and my wife and my son. Stops by my son's job and will check on him and pal around and joke. John's a real funny guy, if people don't know. A fierce competitor, but he has great sense of humor also. And he's been great. And I'm not upset. John and Espo, they had to recruit the best kids in the country, even though they're leaving, because that's their job. They can't just leave and not recruit. That's their job's to bring in the best kids. I get it. They couldn't tell us, but it sure would have been nice to know before I sold my house in Ohio and moved cross country to Oklahoma. But it is what it is. So my boy opens up recruitment and decommits from OSU, and OU has a brand new coaching staff that happens to be from the Central Midwest. Where I've been living all this time, and they made us an offer that was so great, and they're going to pay for everything. They're going to, the NIL money. My son's not going to have to work. He's going to have plenty of spending money. Enough to where he doesn't have to ask me for anything. So it's, and they've guaranteed he'll redshirt. And I made him look, and I went beyond that. Because I knew, when you're in the state of Oklahoma where wrestling is real serious, like in Iowa, like in PA, those are the three big spots. When you flip to your in-state rival, that's a big deal in Oklahoma. You burn bridges. You're like, there's no going back to OSU after we flip to an in-state rival. So I had them, promise to do some things like making sure that they put my son in front of these big utility companies, gas companies that operate here in Oklahoma. They have to help us develop a relationship, and we already have a job offer with ONG, which is the largest natural gas provider in the state of Oklahoma. It's the largest in Kansas and the third largest in Texas. And this is before you even start school. So networking, being at a big university, I'm down in the OKC metro area. It's I think it's I think it's all going to work out just fine. Did you know my son just won his last state championship over the
Yeah,
weekend?
yep. Oh, that's
Yeah.
that was the last Facebook stuff I saw from you there. He getting his hand raised.
82 points.
Yeah, it looked like a basketball score.
82 points in 3 matches. I mean, it's just, like no one puts up those kind of points.
Yeah,
Uh, but he went out there and he put on a show. He's got a little bit of showmanship in him also,
yeah.
where he could pin these kids quickly, right? Could have pinned the kid in the state final, but he wanted to put on a show, give fans the money's worth. Uh, but look, he's a good kid. He's humble, quiet. I do all the bragging. He doesn't talk about it. If it wasn't for his two chewed up ears, you wouldn't know he was an athlete. You
Now,
know.
let me ask you this because you know he looks like with the job and the networking that you're doing, he may even have his future planned, way out. I saw a post recently where old Monty Cox was talking about, hey, there's that MMA contract for Barrick. Now,
Yeah.
if Barrick wanted to do it, you probably have to let him do it because that's the way you are as a father. But do you want him to fight? Is he going to fight, or because it seems like you know fighting filled a gap for you in made you feel like, okay, I'm good at something.
Yeah.
Derek doesn't have that gap. He knows he's already good at something. He's already got those accomplishments. So would you let him do, would you steer him away from MMA at this point?
Yeah, for sure. He's already won state titles in judo and jujitsu, and he was on an amateur boxing team, and he's rode two bulls while we were out in Arizona. Cliff jumping, rock climbing, squeezing through little tiny holes and rocks that we shouldn't have, going
Spelunking.
spelunking.
Yep.
We've done a lot of the cool, dangerous stuff, and
Joe, no,
that
no offense, Joe, but are
it's
you
just
spelunking? Because
no. Yeah,
Joe,
no, he's not going to fight. He's not going to fight. Look, we're going to make sure that he has a job to where after 20 years, he's got a pension. After 25, 30 years, yeah, his pension is going to look even better. And then if he wants to travel around the world with that money he has coming to him, then great. I think he and I both love meeting new people and eating new foods. Sitting down, and eating. We've been eating a lot of Indian food, and it's just, look, we're there's a lot of things to enjoy where he doesn't have to get busted up.
yeah, no, that's for sure. Now, as we close up, and again, this is one of those things where maybe you didn't get to the world championship level, in MMA, but you do seem to be on the world championship level as a father, for sure, the way you've guided him and stuff. But let me ask you about the moment. There had to be a moment, or maybe not yet, but you get on the mat with him. When did he finally beat you? Because I know that you
Oh,
probably didn't give that up.
no. It was just a couple weeks ago. I'm in practice and I'm helping out. And I got a pair of Hey Dudes on. I've got my blue jeans on, probably a black T-shirt that I always wear, and as I was going to leave the room, he yells out to me, "Dad, Dad!" And I went, "Yeah." He says, "Get out of here." Well, he challenged me in front of everybody as they were leaving, but he did it loud enough to where they could hear him. And Coach Quid, our assistant coach, young guy that wrestled junior college out in California that wrestles with Barrick in practice, he refereed. It was only one takedown. And as soon as he said wrestle, I grabbed a hold of him, put him in I dug an underhook. He got out. I went 2-on-1, snapped him down to the mat, butt drag, run behind, scored two on him. And I've been talking shit to him ever since then. I'm just too big. I'm too big and too strong. Now, after 1 year of college, I'm in trouble.
Okay, so you
you
still
know,
got the advantage. I
Oh
kn-
well, I'm listen. I'm 100 pounds bigger than him, you know,
sure. No, no.
and
Obviously, it
everything
doesn't
he
take a
knows, I taught him.
right, and obviously, it's not taking away anything from him. But I know from some of the wrestling that I've been around that that's a rite of passage right there, where the dad, the coach, losing to the student at some point. That's a moment that you guys are going to remember and cherish. So,
Oh,
um,
my buddy up in Iowa, Tim Hernandez, his son went to Iowa State, and he's already told me, his son's already graduated from college. He said after that first year, he would come home, and he said I wouldn't wrestle him anymore because he would whoop the shit out of me, and I know that's coming. And listen, I'd be disappointed if he couldn't whoop me, right?
at some point,
But
you got to give it up. Yeah.
yeah, it's coming.
Well, Joe, I want to thank you very much for an incredible interview. Very heartfelt. You're as genuine. You're the real deal. You always were, but you're the real deal even in the interview. Go ahead, close
Let,
out
let me
however you want.
let me say this, and this is hopefully whoever watches this and have whatever. Listen, I've been good guy, bad guy to a lot of people, and I've been a knucklehead for most of my life, and there's something about having a kid that really changed my outlook on everything. And you know, my teammates, people I've fought against. I'm not going to name any names, but there's something that you have to sacrifice to be great at that high level, and it might be leaving your kids back in another state. It might be messing with the wrong women and having kids with them. Whatever it is. Look, I take a lot of pride that I was a winner and I stayed with the same woman for 26 years. That I've managed to raise a kid that's going to be a productive person in life. That morally is a good person. He's going to grow up and help people, and then athletically, he's been on the honor roll all through junior high and high school, and he's going to be a Division I athlete. Something like 1% of all high school athletes ever make it to the Division I. Well, even a smaller percentage ever gets a scholarship. And I'm bragging here, but my boy got a full ride, everything paid for, and that took a lot of work.
For sure.
And it's the and listen, I know I know it might come off, in a way that I don't want it to, but I'm very proud that my wife and I were able to accomplish this because we see all these broken families and we see these kids making mistakes and doing things they're not supposed to be doing. You know what? I wasn't a world champion. I get it. I didn't do all the right things. But I tell you what, I made just about every mistake you can make without spending a lot of time in prison. And mostly that's because I didn't get caught on a lot of the stuff that I did. And so I try not to be judgmental, because the difference is, I didn't get caught, someone else did, so I try to be fair about it.
Sure.
But
But hey,
we've done right.
yeah, you paid
We've
the
done right
dues.
by my boy.
Yeah, you paid the dues. You learned the lessons so you could pass them on. and you've done a great job. That's what I meant about World Championship Dad.
I
And
appreciate it.
it's a shame with the way society is at times, especially for us older guys, that you can say that you take pride in being with the same woman and having being a family man, and then not everybody on the planet says this guy is somebody to admire, but you are definitely somebody to admire. You're a hero, dude.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
With that, we'll end it. I appreciate your time, Joe, and I'll send you a link when we have it up. Okay.
All right. Thanks, buddy. See you.
Take it easy, buddy. Thank you, and thank your wife.